Hello, everybody, and welcome to our live coverage of President Joe Biden's first State of the Union speech. I am Crystal Ball, joined by Marshall Kosloff and Sagar and Jetty and Kyle Kulinski. It is all happening. We got realignment.
That's
we got
right.
Crystal Kyle and friends. We got secular talk. We got breaking points. After the speech, we're going to have Marianne Williamson and Zed Jelani on, so make sure you join us afterwards, too. And we're going to stream the speech live on the channel, so you don't have to go anywhere for that. As I mentioned, this is actually Biden's technically his first State of the Union, because the first year that a president is in office, they deliver an address to Congress, but it's not technically a State of the Union. Another thing that's noteworthy is this is one of the latest State of the Unions that has been done. That was the choice of Speaker Pelosi, who wanted to sort of push things off because of coronavirus and because of their own agenda. We do have a couple of excerpts that have been released from the speech. Predictably, one about Ukraine and one about the economy. I'll just read a little bit of that, and then you guys can get a little bit of reaction and get into the polls and some of those things. So on Ukraine, they say, he's planning to say, American diplomacy matters. Putin's war was premeditated and unprovoked. He rejected efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO would not respond, and he thought he could divide us here at home. Putin was wrong. We were ready. Also, Wall Street Journal reporting that he's going to announce that Russian flights will be banned from U.S. airspace. So a little bit of news out of that.
Yeah, that definitely is some of the big news. And the domestic agenda, it's important to look at this as well. We brought you guys during our show about how Biden is going to be talking a significant amount about inflation. And Crystal, the things that have been released here, guys, we've all been talking about this, is in terms of the way the inflation messaging seems to poll test the best, is not necessarily like, about cutting costs. It's about, look, we have two options. We can make you poorer. Biden is set to say that's the Republican plan, or I can lower your costs. And he's going to be going after shipping, the industry in particular, trying to target consolidation there. Also talking there about trying to increase the amount of competition. I think, Crystal, it was a poll done a couple of weeks ago, which showed that was the single best message that was tested whenever it came to inflation. It also happens to be true in terms of helping costs. So I think that's pretty significant. I mean, Kyle, what are you looking at in terms of the excerpts on the speech right now?
Well, just first, let me just comment on that real quick, the inflation thing. You made a good point earlier, Crystal. I don't know why. I don't know why he doesn't just blame it on corporate greed and take that.
Well, it seems very likely he's going to take some of that approach.
I mean,
I'll predict he won't. What do you think?
I was going to say, very specifically, like, he may say some vague things, but what would actually matter is to put specific corporations on blast.
Right.
And, we saw this, Marshall, when he did just a little bit with regard to the meatpacking industry. They put out a little press release. He gave like a little presser that didn't get a whole lot of attention. And for the first time, meat prices actually went down a little bit because you have mass consolidation in that industry. A majority of Americans already believe that corporate greed is not the only issue with inflation, but one of the issues with inflation. We've got corporate CEOs admitting on earnings calls that they're jacking up prices beyond what is necessary. They're making record-breaking profits. So if he really wanted to sort of land an easy win on the domestic agenda, I think you go full FDR, calling them out, not just in generalities, but specifics, name names, name companies. I do not expect him to do that at all.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, just because, look, it's funny, you said at the start of this that Pelosi delayed this. In retrospect, that was very, very lucky for Biden. This isn't really about specifically the agenda item, it's about the fact that masking is limiting up. I just came to D.C. from New York. It was wild. I did not have to wear a mask in a hotel.
Welcome.
That was important. You have the fact that the Biden approach to diplomacy seems to be successful in terms of saying we're not going to intervene with troops. I am not owning this. This is Putin's responsibility. So when you combine those factors with what you're talking about, with specifically naming, there's credibility. Because I get what you were saying in the December sense, but I don't think until now the credibility would have just been there. I think if you'd thrown out different industries and different companies, people would have just treated it as noise. But right now, the State of the Union, that's an opportunity to say something.
Yeah, on the one hand, they obviously had to basically rip this whole speech up that they'd been working on for months. And totally go back to the drawing board. And anything that was going to be the focus in the economic agenda. We saw some leaks also that they're going to focus on climate change and make that part of the case for this is how we're going to lower inflation. I think that's a harder sell, frankly, than the sort of corporate greed angle. But all of those things are going to be secondary to whatever he says on Ukraine and on foreign policy. And right now we're going to get into some of the polling specifically. Right now he's in this tricky spot just from the political perspective where if you ask Americans about the approach they want us to take vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, Biden is doing what the American people basically want him to do. But if you ask them how they feel about how Biden is doing on Russia and Ukraine, it was like 42% in favor. So that analysis of how he specifically is doing is being fed very much through a partisan lens rather than Americans saying, oh, I want these things done, and actually the president is doing those things.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem for him right now is that he's basically playing whack-a-mole because you have these like new issues that pop up, whether it's Russia and Ukraine or it's inflation or it's gas prices. And then it's like, so he has to divert his attention to that and talk about that. But then it's like you're not laying out a governing vision, which is like something broader, something, philosophical. He's not really focusing on or tackling giant issues like healthcare, which usually polls as one of the top issues for the American people. He's not talking about aspects that were part of his Build Back Better agenda, like elder care, like universal pre-K and the $15 minimum wage. So I don't think your speech can really be successful if you're not really defining the terms of the political era.
Yes.
Somebody like Reagan, we all know that his thing was what the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. You had Bill Clinton, and we'll get to some of that a little later on in this show, but he also said the era of big government is over. So you need to sort of, if he wants to really leave a legacy, he would have to pursue the policy agenda, but also let it be known, like, I want to usher in a New Deal era. And he's not doing that. He's just playing whack-a-mole, and that's not going to get him anywhere.
This is a very important point. And, Crystal, I think we should get to the Gallup numbers that you pulled specifically.
Because this is the backdrop against which this entire speech unfolds. In addition to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you have a country that just isn't very happy with how things are going. Right. Let's go ahead and throw that Gallup poll up on the screen. This is maybe the most significant number to understand our politics today overall. All the debates about CRT or masking or any of these things, I think, is not even close to as consequential as the fact that you have just 21% of Americans right now, according to Gallup, saying that they are satisfied with the way that things are going. 78% of Americans say they are dissatisfied. That is among the lowest ratings that we have seen. In terms of issues, economy is the top concern. Government leadership is the second highest concern. And then COVID is down to 13%. Wow. You have 42% saying giving the economy the lowest possible rating, saying it is poor. Wow. 37% saying it's only fair. A mere 21% say that the economy is either excellent or good. And oh, by the way, 70% of people say that the economy is getting worse. So, Marshall, this is the other issue that Biden faces is, look, they've got some numbers they can point to. They've been out there trying to make the case that, look at job growth, up until result, the stock market's good. I mean, there are things that they can point to. Even wage growth has been up, even though that's been eaten away by inflation. But you're not going to persuade the American people that their lives are different than the way that they are experiencing them.
Yeah, so that's why, look, I want to go to Kyle's point around Bill Clinton giving the big speech, Reagan. Joe Biden isn't either of those presidents. Why was Joe Biden elected? Joe Biden at his core was elected because this guy is supposed to make things normal. And I think the opportunity here isn't the ideal opportunity. The ideal opportunity would be a governing vision for this country. But given everything that Biden has, given his 50 plus years in government, what he can actually do tonight is say, hey, this is our reset point. I've stabilized our position in Eastern Europe. I haven't committed troops. I'm not going to escalate. I'm sure you all are fearing this, but the number one thing that people are sending me when they're sending in questions or talking to your friends is, hey, is there going to be a nuclear war next week? Joe Biden's only actual job for the next week or so is going to be proving he's not going to do anything to make that any worse. And I think what you could then do once you've stabilized is then build, because that's the biggest problem with the governing vision issue right now.
Yeah, let's put that Gallup tear sheet up there, actually. actually, please. And the important part of that is that when satisfaction is low and the economic concerns remain high, I've got a book behind us, so you can't see it right now, but I reference it all the time, Freedom from Fear, which is FDR, very much to this point, confronted major international crises abroad and a massive economic crisis. And what he did is he fused the two into saying America will be strong, we will rebuild, and he combined it with a domestic economic program. And especially in a major flashpoint like right now, what you're talking about, Marshall, when you have such, and you guys can see those wrong track numbers there down at the bottom, that's catastrophic. He needs to combine this in a sense of we're not going to wage war abroad, we're going to wage war on the price increase at the pump. We will guarantee you, and I mean, I've talked so much about this, but so much of this doesn't even have to do with Congress. I mean, a lot of it has to do with I will guarantee, I will do everything in my power to bring that gas price down, to make sure, I mean, right now, Crystal, is the highest we have ever seen on wheat prices since 2009. The spot commodity index hit the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. This is catastrophe. Sunflower oil, 75% of it comes from Russia. People are going to see real increase in the price of food, in the price of gas. A $4 a gallon national average is very likely as a national average. Not saying it to scare anybody, but as a problem that the president needs to confront, he needs to show vigor. And this gets to actually what Kyle said. Look, no fan of a lot of Ronald Reagan policy, but what he was so great at doing was to combine both the confrontation of the Soviet Union with how people were feeling with 1979 with it's morning. We're going to crawl out of this hole. And if he doesn't do that, then Biden is on his way to becoming Jimmy Carter.
In a lot of ways, much to my chagrin, we are still living in the Reagan era.
Sure.
So
for sure.
It was incredibly politically successful, even though I find almost every part of it to have been a disaster for our country and for the world. Listen, when you're president, you have to play the hand that you're dealt, okay? This is where we are. And so what I'll look for in this speech is, did they just take the speech that they wanted to give that has, we saw some details, they're going to call for raising the Pell Grants by $2,000. Oh, wow, big deal. They are going to sort of uselessly call again for the $15 minimum wage, which of course we know they have no intention of or no plan in order to pass. And some other measures, the paid leave, that again, they don't seem to really have a plan to get through. So do you just take that old speech and sort of stick it on to a new beginning with regard to Ukraine? Or do you use what is unfolding in our geopolitics today to stitch together a narrative around, climate is obvious here. Part of why American consumers and the working class are so exposed is because we haven't taken the steps to get off of fossil fuel. That has made us incredibly vulnerable, not just to Russia, but to the Saudis as well, who've been colluding with Russia to increase prices. That's part of why you are facing higher prices at the pump. So rally people around a national agenda that has been brought into clear focus of why this matters, given what we see unfolding in Ukraine and Russia, because the more dependent we are on countries overseas, the more we are dependent on globalization, the more vulnerable we are, Kyle, the more that we have handed our, would-be adversaries and competitors and some of the worst, most malign actors around the world, economic cudgels that they can use against our own population.
I feel, though, like Manchin has hijacked the narrative effectively. I just saw an article on this earlier today where Joe Manchin is out there saying, look, this proves we need to increase our own reliance on fossil fuels and, but use our stuff from here at home. So my guess is that Biden, in terms of his policy, is more going to go down that path as opposed to what you're talking about, which is hey, maybe this is the perfect opportunity to totally try to get off of fossil fuels and usher in the future when it comes to, solar, wind, whatever the new technology is. Because the other thing is there are inevitable patents in those industries that are going to come. And so the question is, do you want the U.S. to get those patents, or do you want China or some other country to get those patents? And if we get those patents, then there you have it right there. It could be, the future of some sort of new deal, and we start the process now.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and read this from Joe Manchin. So here's what he said. 3 different points here. He says we need to ban all Russian energy imports now. Now, I've seen some reports here that Russian oil is very likely to be de facto banned from the United States. Number 2, though, he says we need to dramatically increase domestic production of energy. And number 3, he says we need to compel every energy company to immediately cease any and all investment, operations, and production in Russia. I think we should put Joe Manchin's money where his mouth is. And Marshall, you and I have been discussing at this, and you're going to be doing something on nuclear as well. I think this is the nuclear energy moment. I mean, we have here the moment where we could actually call for, and I do think there could at least be some semi-bipartisan consensus, or at least put people's money where their mouth is, where they say, hey, I'm not for wind and solar. Okay, fine, let's go all in on nuclear. That's great. When we could create an opportunity right now to frame it, as Crystal is saying, in the context of the geopolitical situation that we face. Look at Germany. That's the most compelling use case we possibly can. We have Germany here, decommissions all these nuclear energy plants, increases their reliance on Russian gas, 50% or something of their energy imports now coming from there, and they're about to face economic catastrophe. And as a result, they're actually making sure that they're not going to decommission their nuclear energy plants on the same timeline that they were before. This is a time, and Crystal, one of the immediate things you and I called for, at the day, I think on Thursday, the day of the invasion, we were like, we need a nuclear New Deal. This is actually one of those times where this is, it's one of those things that doesn't actually track with a lot of partisan politics. And it's a way that Biden could rise above, I think, to where we are right now. And I would actually be very hard pressed to find Joe Manchin a way to rhetorically slip out of something like that.
Yeah, and the key thing here is, a lot of, I hate to say all of the above energy policy, because we know that has certain cringe elements to it. But the thing that's actually...
Baby drill.
This isn't 2008.
I do think we should drill in the short term.
The key thing is scarcity mentality. I mean, this is something you talk about all the time, Crystal. Like, the opportunity here for Joe Biden is, once again, he can't agree with Joe Manchin on the lowering dependence on Russia. There's the easy tie to the geopolitics with Russia there too. And then there's just the broad point of, with this nuclear New Deal that you're talking about, Sagar, you need investment in science, you need investment in technology, and that also needs to be applied to areas like clean energy and other basic spaces like that too. So that's something comprehensive. If we're thinking back to why Build Back Better just didn't really catch, what were people just saying in the polling? What were they saying on the street? It just seemed like this big amount of money, and there was just no tie to it. I think what Biden could do, I think we're getting to the vision point you're talking about earlier, Kyle, which is, look, America needs to come back. We can come back. Here are these very specific ways that we can come back, and here are the ways I specifically am going to do that. This isn't just me throwing, $3 trillion. I remember I was listening to Chamath Palihapitiya on the All In podcast, and he was saying, what if we just took the $3 trillion and put it towards solar energy? And that's what was silly. That isn't how this works. But there's something directionally accurate about that, in the sense that investing large amounts of money in specific ideas would make more sense in these amorphous programs.
Well, this is something, Kyle, you talk about all the time, which is channeling people's energy into one big national project that they can sink their teeth into, that everybody can kind of get on board with, that feels like a kind of coming together and a way for us to get our mojo back and restore some pride. And, oh, by the way, address some of the critical issues that we face as a country right now. And listen, I mean, the thing with Joe Biden, I was actually talking to the leader of a elite DC progressive organization who has a lot more ties in than any of us do to the Biden administration. And he was asking me, he was like, what do you think, this was before Ukraine and Russia, he's like, what do you think they're even going to call for on the economic agenda? I mean, that's the thing, is we can all sort of speculate all of these different directions, because Joe Biden has never once made it clear what his actual priorities are. Even during Build Back Better, remember, we would talk to Jeff Stein about, what do you think are his red lines here? Like, what does he actually care about and pushing for? And he told us, I think that maybe it's the free community college. And then, a week later, that was out of the bill. So, the hodgepodge of things that we've seen floated as what would be in his speech, it's just sort of random. There doesn't seem to have been any real specific, this is my thing, this is my legacy, this is what I'm going to get done. And so, the Build Back Better debate just ended up being about the price tag rather than any specific program that people could really understand how this is going to benefit my life particularly.
I think Joe Biden has totally bought into the conventional wisdom in Washington, and it's what every staffer around him tells him, which is look, man, the squad is defining you. You've gone too far left. You got to reel it in. So my guess is, and you're going to see this in the speech, and afterwards we can tell whether or not I was right, but there's going to be a lot of overtures to the moderate that he thinks he's, not in good favor with. So it's going to be a lot of stuff on deficit reduction and things of that nature. I do think he'll probably throw in lines about the $15 minimum wage or this or that, but I think that the heart of the speech is going to be to try to pick off the never Trump Republican and the moderate voter. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope he goes out there swinging. But my guess is it's going to be that mixed with the whack-a-mole thing I just talked about before, which is we got to talk about Russia and Ukraine. We got to talk about inflation. We got to talk about high gas prices. But again, this isn't generation-defining stuff. This isn't leaving you a legacy. This is like you're the technocratic manager who's falling flat on his face and falling asleep halfway through his speech.
You're like, and like a terrible technocratic manager.
Of course,
it'd be way better if he was actually a competent.
That was Obama.
Technocratic
For all of
manager.
his flaws, that was Obama.
At least he spoke well. Let's give it to him.
Yeah, yes.
Here's the big. We're not even talking about the Republicans here, and that's actually kind of the elephant in the room. You all saw Senator Rick Scott's, let's just say, not well managed plan. I mean, even Mitch McConnell had to disown this plan. There's this
Can
funny.
you explain for the audience?
Yeah. So basically,
yeah.
I actually can't explain the actual plan, but the basic idea is Matt Yglesias had a great joke where he said, "It's funny." Rick Scott got in trouble for saying the quiet part out loud when it came to Social Security, increased taxes on working class people. Basically, Mitch McConnell has to disown it because you're not supposed to be talking about the actual economic
Raising
costs
taxes.
of that actual
for
idea.
and it's just like the most cringe, like, kids are gonna say the Pledge of Allegiance again. And
there are
we're gonna
two genders.
we're gonna finish the border wall and we're gonna name it after Donald Trump.
Yes.
It's like that sort of
Yeah,
stuff
but he
as
combined
well.
that, though, Crystal.
With like
we're going to raise taxes on working class
Yeah.
Americans, and also even brought back the 47% rhetoric, which takes skill in order to be that much of an idiot. I genuinely believe he's a low IQ individual.
And isn't this the guy who technically is like sort of running the campaign side of the Republican
Yes,
operation?
RNS,
yeah,
yeah,
the NRSC, which is the National Republican Senatorial Commission. So,
But you know what's sad is they're still gonna. It doesn't matter. Like,
you're right.
Even if so, McConnell's plan is obviously smarter of just saying nothing and letting Democrats hang themselves.
Yeah.
Like that's clearly the smarter political direction to go. Even if they ran on Rick Scott's complete garbage nonsense, they still are in line for massive wins. And, you know, we're going to show you in a moment what Biden's approval rating looks like and how it compares to other presidents.
Not good.
But the picture is not pretty.
This is literally maybe the first time that I've been covering politics where I've flat out agreed with Mitch McConnell. Like Mitch McConnell's point was like, say nothing. They're going to fall on their face, let them fall on their face, and everybody will just fill in the blanks with what they think maybe we believe. It's just a pendulum swing election. We're going to win. Don't worry about it. And then Rick Scott comes out and he's like, I don't know, education, colorblind equality. Like they're not even really policies. They're just like vague right-wing virtue signal things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's no there. And I was saying this earlier on Twitter, he makes Newt Gingrich's Contract with America look like it was written by Noam Chomsky.
Hey, listen,
He makes it
at
look
least
like that.
Contract for America was an actual plan.
It was.
I'm not saying
It
it was a
was.
good plan, but it was
a plan.
certainly a thing. And Gingrich was like, look, we're not going to raise any taxes. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, welfare reform, etc. And he was largely successful in doing those things. Crystal alluded to this 538 thing. Guys, go ahead and put the third element, please. We're going to skip the second one, how Biden compares with past presidents. Now, what's very important here for you guys to see is that you can see exactly where Biden tracks with past ones. Now, George W. Bush is obviously an aberration. This is the post 9/11
So
era.
Biden, just so people
Right.
can see, because it took me a long time
Yeah.
to figure out what the hell this was trying to tell me. The green is Biden.
Yeah, the green is Biden.
And the black is all these different presidents at the same period in time.
For those who are just listening, what we can go ahead and describe it as is he's virtually tied with Donald Trump. Now, the reason why you don't want to be in that situation is that Donald Trump, despite having a low general approval rating, had an extremely high approval rating within the Republican Party, up into the high 90th percentile. Biden, on the other hand, only has about 40% of Democrats who even want him to run for president again. So has no enthusiasm on his side whatsoever. Has a general disapproval as well as a lack of base approval. Compare him also to Barack Obama, and you can see the exact same thing. Obama was sitting right around 49.8%. Biden currently at 41.9%. To be clear, these are aggregated numbers. So this is about as close as we're going to get. Take all the grains of salt, with the polls. Against George W. Bush, it's not really all that applicable. But even look at Bill Clinton, who himself suffered, the Contract for America defeat. At this same point in his presidency, guys, Bill Clinton was at 48%. He was almost above water. Biden is below that. Biden is below where George W. Bush was at this time. He was at 73.
HW.
Sorry, George
HW.
H.W.
Well,
Bush.
NW,
NW.
significantly.
Obviously, everybody's always going to be below W and also above W in an interesting sense. But I think the final and the most important comparison I'm going to continue to track all the way through is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was more popular than Joe Biden was at this time in his presidency. Don't get me wrong, Carter does have the all-time low at 28.8%, but if Biden does not handle himself well, not just necessarily tonight, but throughout this international crisis, and if the inflation, the stagflation continues to come, if we see gas hit, for example, $5 a gallon across the nation, or gas lines or anything like that, I think he's done.
So here's what I will say as a little bit of maybe a bright spot for Joe Biden is it does seem like in a couple of the very latest approval polls, it's ticked up a couple of points, more to the 42, 44 range. But
you can work with that.
You know, the problem with him being more or less tied with Trump, Marshall, is that the people who liked Trump really liked Trump. The people who are still with Biden are like, this is maybe the best we could get. It's okay. I certainly like him better than the other guys. He has the hard opposition now. I mean, that used to be kind of his strength is, he didn't have like the people who were passionately in love with him, but he also didn't have the passionate hatred early on in the presidency. He didn't make that good of a villain for Republicans. They were going after other stuff and trying to tie him to AOC and that sort of stuff. Now he's got the passionate hatred burning for him on the other side, and he does not have a passionate core base that is going to show up for him through thick and thin. So that really creates a worst of all worlds where in a certain way it's even worse than that terrible picture we just showed you of his approval rating being among the lowest of any president in recent history.
Well, Crystal, you just set that up perfectly. Sagar and I were talking about this on the way into the show, which is the Republican Party's in a bind, given everything you just said. Because like you said, there are very few, there's not even a nickname for like the Biden people, because they're the chromosexuals. Like, I don't really know what a Biden stand would be.
Biden bros?
Yeah, sleepy stands.
Yeah, the sleepy stand. I like sleepy stand. I'm actually a huge, you should coin that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, do you know what people are going to stand for, quote unquote? Opposing Trump. So Trump, the person who would walk away with the Republican nomination, if held today, if held tomorrow, if held a year from now, is the person who would activate the Democratic base. Because guess what? You're right. No one is going to get up and just affirmatively fight for Joe Biden. That's a situation where if you're Governor Ron DeSantis, you're in a good place. I mean, Ted Cruz. There's a couple of Republicans where this seems to be a good situation. But if Trump is nominated, that seems to be the only way out that I could straightforwardly see for Joe Biden.
Democrats.
Yeah.
In terms of the enthusiasm gap you're describing there, Trump instantly changes that.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think Trump still to this day is perpetually underestimated. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of signs that he's sort of off in the wilderness a little bit now. He cannot stop talking about January 6th. And it's like, this is the last thing anybody wants you to be talking about. But never underestimate Donald Trump. And by the time the next election comes around, Biden can't just hang out in his basement all day like he did for the last election. So he's got to actually get out there on the campaign trail.
Do you think Trump would be a more formidable opponent than sort of generic Republican X?
No, I think generic Republican X would probably have a higher likelihood of beating Biden. But I think if it's Trump versus Biden again, it's a coin toss.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, this is always the issue with Trump, which is he's his own worst enemy, and he's also probably the best, quote-unquote, Republican, because he has a huge amount of polarization. He can get people to come out to the polls, love him or hate him. He activates almost every citizen in the country, had the highest number of people who came out to vote for him, the most votes of any Republican president. He just doesn't tell you about the other side in that election for a sitting president. But the reason why it's important on this front is Trump is the X factor. He does literally change everything. The other problem, though, in a lot of our analysis is that the DeSantises of the world and all of them, if Trump runs, it's not going to happen. He is the nominee if he runs.
They won't run.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the only way in which this entire election will play out. Here's the reason why I think Trump is more formidable in 2024. Make America great again after years of inflation, of Russia, of all of this is a potent symbol. Here's the other thing. The best thing that ever happened to Donald Trump was getting kicked off of Twitter because people forgot how annoying he can be. And I, unfortunately, still have to read all of his idiotic statements about, did you see so-and-so on Fox News?
Thanks for taking one for the team.
Yeah,
there,
welcome. Yeah. By the way, Trump team, please unsubscribe me from these emails. Go ahead.
I want to build into that because it's a key. Like, look at what Trump said the day, and I'm not trying to be MSNBC here, but the day of Putin's invasion, Trump was like, "Oh, that was a very smart move." That is an example of how. Can you imagine how bad the tweets would have been?
Oh, yeah,
and now he's praising Zelensky. He's doing his like Trumpy thing, but that's what people don't like. So I think this is really. And look, we know by now, we've done this for like 7 years. Yeah. He is not going to change. So the question is, how much? But I want to say something, because what's interesting is, it's not just that Trump's running again on MAGA if he runs. He's basically running on Make America 2019 again. Yeah, which is and that is a potent argument, and that's going to be very tough on the Biden. In terms of the job numbers, the general, like, what is a mask, like, what is COVID?
When I was president, he could say it over and over.
And the polls, and you guys covered this, the polls show that a majority of Americans think that it would not have happened when Trump was president. So it's a weird.
I mean, listen, the bottom line of what that matchup is going to be is how people feel about the economy at that point, how they feel about the right track, wrong track. And there are things that could go horribly awry for him. You could continue to have inflation spike. You could continue to have people feel like they're, stuck in reverse. Or you could have some things bounce in their direction where really through no doing of his own, the economic prospects are looking a lot better. Right. Masks are already coming off. Like that sense of the return to normal is coming into place sort of right now. So that's what it's ultimately going to come down to, because Lord knows this man is not really going to accomplish any more agenda before we get to the presidential election. So it's going to be the whims of what the overall climate is, Kyle.
I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel for Biden, because the way out for him, he can't rely on like charisma or like his base. So the way out for him is policy. And he's just shown he doesn't have the chops. He doesn't have the LBJ ability or the FDR ability to arm twist the senators in his own party to get them to come on board. And so he's just stuck in limbo.
You guys don't think the bipartisan infrastructure deal, or BIF as it's labeled here, indeed, that's not going to get him over the finish line?
Well, no, but I'll defend Biden on this. Someone has to. Look, he doesn't have FDR's majorities, and he doesn't have LBJ's majorities. Like this is the problem for Joe Biden.
Not even trying, though. That's the problem.
But what I'm just saying, though, is, I mean, look, let's take this back to 2011. So if the Obama issue, Obama's shellacked in the midterms, but then what the Republican Party does is spend 2 years of cringe. So the thing I'm also curious about is how are Republicans going to perform during once they win in the midterms? Like, what is going to, because that's a factor we're not really discussing here, which is like, is Marjorie Taylor Greene going to do another like Nazi rally, that's what I'm genuinely wondering, because that pressure is going to be there, because what happened in 2011 is they got cocky, and I think people are going to be so cocky, and I think as we saw with Rick Scott, he's planning on running for president. Everyone knows this, and that plan was a mini preview of what happens when a bunch of people who think they have a shot overreach.
High on their own
we should actually spend some time on this. This is a good point. We were talking before, like, should we cover the Republican response? And I was like, I don't think anybody cares. Kim Reynolds, like, I barely know who she is, and I don't think anybody's going to tune in to these things. These used to be king-making nights,
Right.
I mean, Marco,
or they were king destroyers.
Joe Kennedy, remember Joe Kennedy?
Joe Kennedy.
Oh my God,
weird lip gloss.
The Bobby Jindal one was the best, though.
I don't know.
Nobody,
pretty bad job.
Nobody ruined, but Marco Rubio has kind of made a little bit of a comeback. Jindal, that was the last we ever heard of that dude. That was over.
Even I think Stacey Abrams did one to Trump. These things these were supposed to be, the slot. It was supposed to be like a real thing, but also in the age of primetime TV, a lot of that stuff is dead. The reason Kim Reynolds, I think, was chosen is anodyne. It's just nothing. It's like, okay, generic Republican. Joe Biden is making us weak. She's from like Iowa, so I don't even know why I'm saying that. But in that accent, but
mask off.
My Texan roots. Okay? Right.
Joe Biden is making us weak less.
What we are going to see is just a generic Biden bad, the country bad, the radical left, and inflation. And by the way, it's going to be extremely
it's a good cocktail.
Potent. But the reason why, though, is that it can't have a face on it. It has to be on the macro political trends. It has to be one of those things where when you vote R, you're not voting for a personality. You're just voting, or not even voting for something. You're voting against the status quo. That's the single most important thing for the party. But to Marshall's point, the reason, look, Obama was an eminently beatable politician in 2012. People think about him like he was a god. Remember, he still only won Florida by 0.8% or whatever in 2012. God blessed him with Mitt Romney. Now, if you have a formidable candidate if you have a different Republican Party at that time that doesn't go full, I'm trying to remember what even 2011 politics they were attacking.
Oh, don't you remember Paul Ryan?
Paul
they were
Ryan
doing PowerPoints on cutting Social Security.
He's like, look at this line. And he said,
politics.
Whoa.
I remember it well.
Pulling some Al Gore, type thing, and then Obama and them truly weaponized against Romney and Paul Ryan in that election, and still they didn't win by that much. People do forget this. The popular vote was significantly less than 2008. This is a similar situation where never underestimate the Republicans to screw things up, right? So we could see some ridiculous Benghazi sideshow, Marjorie Taylor Greene doing something, Rick Scott, passing a constitutional amendment or whatever, that we have a balanced budget, or, these are the exact type of things which we could see. We've seen it time and time again, and especially with fringe characters like Claire McCaskill's race in 2006. There are always, especially with the rising number of kooks, and especially, the media is obviously going to be gunning for the Republicans too in that election. They're going to pick whoever they can. Right now, a lot of the Marjorie Taylor Greene and all that obsession is cringe. But hey, look, they're going to give her a committee seat back, right? That's a whole other news cycle about what's happening. Who knows in terms of some of the riders and things that they're going to insert on these bills. And another thing we should not underestimate, Crystal, is a government shutdown. They would absolutely shut the government down. I'm almost certain of it. They've been floating it constantly about, we got to defund the Democratic lockdowns. And look, I'm anti-lockdown, but, in terms of strategy, all of that, I get why it would play with the base. We have no idea how the national public will respond to that. So the current state of the Republican Party, there's no consensus. Trump has made it more boorish in rhetoric. That is going to come out to no unifying agenda. It could be a boon to Joe Biden.
Well, and they're doing these kind of it's sort of like identity politics for the working class. Like, we're going to say worker a lot, and we're going to maybe float putting a worker without any power or vote on the board. It's the same. It's like a diversity initiative, except for the working class. So when you find out there's no there in terms of the new rhetoric, it can ring as hollow as I think the identity politics plays do now. But, the other piece of this that I think is really important is that a majority of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee next time.
Right.
And so that opens a huge door where I think it is very likely he faces a primary opponent. Do I think if he's, able to run and all that it's going to be easy for a primary opponent to defeat him? No, he's an incumbent president. He's a leader of the Democratic Party. There's going to be all kinds of rallying of the circling of the wagons. That's the saying. But you've got a major dissatisfied chunk of the Democratic Party who's looking at the writing on the wall just like we are and saying, I don't know if this is our best horse to go up against Donald Trump again. That electability narrative that he had last time, he may have to work to reclaim, especially if the midterms go as poorly as we expect them to.
Yeah, I hate to say this because it sounds too definitive, but I think we live in the pendulum age when it comes to politics. And the reason I think that is because nobody is really substantively serving the people. So what you see is one party wins and people go, oh, this is terrible, let's vote for the other guys. And the other party wins and people go, oh, this is terrible, let's vote for the other guys. And you just go back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. So, by that logic, it's honestly, anything could happen in 2024 because if the Republicans win big in these midterms, as we sort of expect them to, then people might go, well, they're acting really weird too. So maybe you do go for a Democrat for 2024. I don't know. But I really do think the overarching theme is that we live in the pendulum age because people they vote for somebody, they hate them because they don't deliver, then they just vote for the other people.
Yeah, we've basically had 6 change elections in a row.
Right.
Just to give people an update, the president is inside the motorcade. It's about a 2-minute drive, basically because he gets the entire street cleared for him. Thank you for the traffic, by the way, Mr. President. He's on his way over to the Capitol, so usually there's a little bit of a song and dance. He'll be greeted, obviously. Then he goes traditionally to, there's a chapel where he's supposed to pray. And then after that, they bring him to the floor, and then there's that famous moment, which of course we'll have for all of you, which is the Sergeant of Arms saying, Madam Speaker, the President of the United States, and he'll enter the building. So I think, Kyle, should we pivot over to, you thought it was important in order to put these clips together of historical ones. Why don't you set that up for the audience?
Yeah, so I was looking back at the old school interesting and important and somewhat historic moments from these State of the Union speeches from modern history. And we went ahead and put together a nice compilation here that I want to share with everybody, and then we'll react. So take a look.
We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We know and we have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington. And we have to give the American people one that lives within its means. The era of big government is over.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world by seeking weapons of mass destruction.
I have no more campaigns to run. My only agenda, I know because I won both of them.
But we must reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good. Thank you very much. America, thank you very much.
Here's what I have to say to
Wow.
that.
Thank you, Kyle.
Give
really
me the clap for
appreciate
that one. There it is.
Yeah, I was
The
gonna
Nancy
say,
Pelosi
Kyle, you're bringing
clap.
back memories, man. Some of Crystal
So-
and I's early moments on Rising were a lot of these.
The
Yeah.
resistance types really loved when she
Yes.
ripped up the paper.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize it went on that long. I forgot. You know, I
She-
memory,
yeah.
I memory hold a lot
Now,
of this.
too.
now the clap thing,
Yeah.
interestingly enough, when she was asked about that, she was like, I don't know what you guys were talking about. I was clapping because I actually liked the speech.
Right.
So they were trying to be like, yes, Queen, oh my God, you're throwing
Look at the
shade
shade.
with
Right.
this sarcastic clap. And she's like, no, I actually kind of like the speech. It's
We didn't get the standing ovation for Juan Guaido in there either.
Oh, that's
Oh
right.
my God.
You know, now that in
Guaido.
retrospect, in the way that we put that together, though, isn't that the perfect symbol kind of the republic, right? So you had these moments, the era of big government is over. Bill Clinton, he changes the entire Democratic Party, eventually does does enact some policy, not all good, but, you know, works with the Republicans to get something done. George W. Bush, the axis of evil speech, there is no denying that changed the face of the world forever. Not for the better,
Thank you,
but
David Frum.
he did certainly change the entire world. There's no getting around that one. And then you start to see the degradation of Obama, celebrity politics. It's all about him. It's never about actually anything. And then finally, it comes to the Trump clip. We were all trying to decide. We're like, what is a memorable time from the Trump State of the Unions? I was like, honestly, the only ones I can remember are Pelosi clapping and tearing up the
tearing the
speech.
speech.
But that is the perfect symbol of what the Trump era was, right?
Yeah.
The resistance liberals. And I mean, that captured a very ended up being important political coalition. Wine moms and Trump, in his response,
that.
also captured a significant coalition of people who were like, she's so rude, even though, you know, Trump will tweet Stormy Daniels' horse face or whatever. Really what it came down to was what it collapsed is into this moment of the politics of just nothing, of pure theater,
Yeah.
of cultural resentment. We were saying before, oh man, we should have, while the clip was playing, I was like, man, you know, we should have put in that you lie moment with Joe Wilson whenever he accused Obama of lying, although it wasn't during the State of the Union. I think it was during some special
No,
address
I think it
or
was.
whatever.
I think it was State of the
think it was
Union.
You might be right.
Yeah.
You might be right because he was censored and all that. But I remember he raised like $10 million the next day, and that changed everything, right? Like that was the signature moment, Marshall, where you could these backbench. Joe Wilson was nobody. South Carolina congressman, Tea Party. He became a star. And he was on Hannity every night.
That was actually the first State of the Union.
Right.
It was,
So
it was 2009.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that was very early in Obama's presidency.
Right. Well, just to build on this, and this is why, look, I'm a foreign policy person, but I'm really, I genuinely care in a way that I haven't typically during the Trump era, what Biden has to say around Ukraine, in the sense that what is Bill Clinton doing in that big government is over speech? He's responding to the fact that the Democratic Party needed to get its mojo back in the late 90s after, re-election, after the Contract of America. Like, what is George Bush doing? Like, obviously, everyone at this table did not like a single thing George Bush did in that speech. But that being said, he was responding to 9/11 saying, this is what I am doing. Joe Biden, once again, I don't think the Afghan withdrawal was the sheer cause of his polls collapsing, but I think it was timing was just terrible. The timing
it was
hit with the inflation. He has an opportunity tonight to say, look, the reason why the U.S. is playing a stabilizing role in Europe, the reason why we have the energy to pursue these things and build coalitions is because we're not in Afghanistan. And people gave me shit for that, but we're working from the playbook that I built. I said I was going to not go into these wars of choice the way my predecessors have. I am keeping us safe. Like, I think that's the moment that, once again, it cannot be everything like you're saying, Kyle, but I think he needs that as the moment of statement. And once again, that's actually the perfect ground for him to fight on with Republicans, because once again, most Republicans actually agree operationally with his policy. People, this is the one area of actual bipartisan, other than, weird
Mr.
congressman
or Senator Rick Wicker.
Other than a few random members who, frankly, are not driving the debate, he has actual agreement here.
Yeah. I guarantee you he's not going to brag about one of the few good things he did, which is pulling out of Afghanistan. I guarantee you the colossal...
He could reframe it.
I hope he does, but the gigantic media pile-on afterwards, I think it scared him off of it. I remember when we were interviewing Ro Khanna and we asked him, like, well, so is Iraq up next? And even Ro Khanna was like, after this reaction? Like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And, that's the problem.
Well, not to mention, and then finish your point, but not to mention that he really has soured the good that he did there by then freezing their assets and helping to trigger a complete financial system collapse, massive famine, and economic devastation that could end up being worse than, even the horrors that they suffered over these many years of war.
It's honestly worse than the war, to be honest, with the number of people that are starving and just how devastating it is. But to get a little less serious for a second, my embarrassing admission is that I thought that Obama moment was actually awesome.
Oh, the campaign thing?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
this is why he won re-election. Like, that's the point.
He's got swagger.
He was quick on his feet. He was quick on his feet. Like, that's not, like, can you imagine Biden saying something like that? He's more likely to fall asleep halfway through his speech.
Look fat.
I mean,
I do push-ups or something,
I get
which was actually a good moment for him, too.
Your thoughts on this, which is just, here's where my pushback on you is, Kyle. You're very rightfully dunking on Biden's sleepiness and all these very obvious flaws, but you're critiquing him for not having this big vision. It just seems like I'm going to do a Donald Rumsfeld quote. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. As a Democrat, you're going to politics with the Biden you have, not the Biden you want. Given the constraints they're illustrating, what do you actually want him to do?
So that's actually a great question, and that kind of translates or transfers into what we were going to talk about next. So, I mean, first and foremost, what you have to do is brag about the good stuff that you actually did. That's what every president does in one of these speeches. So right off the bat, I would brag about the fact that Biden raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour for all federal government employees and federal government contractors. That's something I would really be aggressive on. The other thing is he did right to repair. Remember that for the farmers. Now, most people don't know what it is. That was a huge deal. Most people don't know what that is, but he has an opportunity to explain it to people. He used to be forced to take your equipment into John Deere and then pay them to fix your stuff. And then now he said, no, that's crazy. You have a right to repair your own stuff. Pulling out of Afghanistan is something else that I would do. One of the things that's not talked about nearly as much as it should be is that he actually massively reduced the drone war, too. Massively reduced the drone war. So those are some of the things that I would brag about if I was him. But the other thing I would do is, look, I would go full, almost like Joker mode if I was Biden, and I would call out the exact people who are blocking his agenda, and I would be specific about why they're blocking it. I would say, it's the Republican Party, and then you got Kyrsten Sinema, and you got Joe Manchin, and these people are taking a tremendous amount of money from giant corporations, and then they're blocking all these basic things that everybody wants according to the polling. And I have some of the polling in front of me right now. So people want Medicare price reduction or, lowering drug prices. That's 73% popular. That's being blocked. Lowering the Medicare age, 59% popular. Universal pre-K, 59% popular. Tuition-free community college, 58% popular. The list goes on and on here. Extending the child tax benefit, that's 9 points over water. And then, of course, the tax hikes. All these things are being, tax hikes on the wealthy, I should be clear. All these things are being blocked by those people right there. And the reason why they're blocking it is because they're corrupt and because they're bought by their donors. So I want you to know who the problem is, and I want you to know that I'm going to work around that. And what I'm going to do, as soon as I'm done with this speech, is go sign an executive order on eliminating student loan debt. Let's do free college by doing rolling student loan debt elimination, which you can do through executive order. I would go down a whole list of things. I'm going to legalize marijuana, or at the very least decriminalize it, and I'll do it through executive order. That's something that polls at like 60, 70% now. But again, I don't think he has it in him. I just don't think, he just doesn't agree with the things I'm saying.
Well, I think this gets to what Marshall was saying, which is at the end of the day, Biden is who he is. All right, like he's got one strength. He's a pretty empathetic guy.
Ice cream Joe's gone.
Yeah,
we had it for a brief shining moment, but it's over.
Here's what I will say. I mean, he is the one who told us to measure him against FDR. Right. I mean, they were the ones who set up that,
put the portrait in there, which
his team, they were the ones going out there and telling everyone this is going to be FDR and this is as transformational as FDR. And I also would say, and I've kind of changed my thinking on this. When he was running for president, I was like, he's running on nothing. I mean, return to normal, that's nothing. But actually, return to normal can be interpreted as an extraordinarily maximalist kind of a thing because, I mean, what does that mean for people? I think when people think about normal, they're not just thinking about, hey, we're going to take off masks. They're thinking about some time in their life where things felt like they were working and like America was moving forward and we had confidence and we had optimism that, things for our kids are going to be better than how they are for us. And so on the one hand, it seemed like kind of a nothing of a statement and framing for the election. On the other hand, it set people up to project a big vision on what that meant to them that he clearly has failed to deliver on.
Yeah, that's a good one piece of news for the geeks out there. Gina Raimondo is the designated survivor for tonight, the Commerce Secretary, and also we're being told
Governor of Rhode Island.
Former Governor of Rhode Island, and being told that we're on standby here. Pelosi apparently has hit the gavel, and the president could be walking into the chamber at any moment. So as soon as the president enters there, we'll go ahead and put him up there.
Gina Raimondo
on the
is
screen.
Also a total corporate tool. So if she's the one that's left, we're all screwed.
Well, she could listen. If you were gonna,
not the nuclear annihilation that ended everything, but the corporate policy, the remaining monopoly.
If we had nuclear annihilation and we had a return to like 1980, I don't really know what we would do.
Well, I mean, look, here's a second question for you too, because you were talking about the primary. So there's two different versions of a primary for Biden I see. One is the holy crap, Kamala can't win. Holy crap, Biden can't win. We need to get a Pete Buttigieg to resign from the cabinet. This is a certain center-left version.
That's already being pushed.
That's the center-left version.
Yes.
But then there's the progressive version. I'm curious how you think Biden should respond or defend against both different versions.
Do some stuff and be more popular. I mean, it's not more complicated than just, actually have an agenda. I do think he may get some credit for his handling of the situation with Ukraine and Russia. They were out front. It's being filtered through a partisan lens. Let's actually put up the polling from CNN. It was,
our second
element that we had in the list. We used it in the show earlier today. But, some of the things that the American people, by the way, are like wholesale on board with, I am personally not. But there is a broad consensus among the American public. 83% of Americans in the CNN poll, that second element, guys, said they favor increased economic sanctions against Russia in response to the invasion, with just 17% imposed. A majority do not want boots on the ground here. So most Americans are basically saying we want what Biden is doing. Now, on the other hand, and this is kind of, and generationally, it's actually interesting too, there aren't big partisan splits here, but younger Americans were less hawkish when asked the question, like, do you want them to do more, undefined more? They were less sort of hawkish and aggressive on those things. But you also see some partisan differences emerging in the sort of the toughness of their stance.
Right.
So you now have 80% of Republicans in a different poll, I think it was Quinnipiac, saying that Biden hadn't done enough, that he needed to do more. this was after you had a kind of Republican emerging conversation about, like, we should just avoid this thing altogether. Now they're all in on it needs to be tougher and it needs to be more. But I do think this is an opportunity where he can take some credit for some foresight, for some leadership, where people are generally behind the direction that he's going in. And, you know, it may ultimately improve his positioning here. So.
You know, something kind of wild that just occurred to me. We've been doing this for 54 minutes. We have not talked about COVID or national COVID policy one time.
I had a mention. I talked about my mask.
Right, no, you talked about masks, but like, that's
true.
Crazy. I mean, what, 3 weeks ago on the show, what were we talking about? School mask mandates, vax mandates, SCOTUS, whether this was going to get rolled back, at what point. Dr. Fauci, I think they've like locked him up and put a gag on the guy and thrown him away in the closet.
Where
he should be,
right?
Frankly, yeah. We should mask him forever and keep him gone. But that's frankly probably this could be one of the best things that ever happened to Joe Biden. And I'm only judging this in a pure political case. I'm not saying it's a good thing that war erupted in Ukraine, but it changed the media narrative completely and totally, right? And so now he's on ground where most people kind of agree with where he is in the most hot button issue. And this also gives the hyperlibs the off-ramp that they needed to stop caring. I mean, here, today is March 1st. We're taping this, so finally the DC mask mandate expired. I was shocked at the number of masks that came off either at my gym or you know, other places, the coffee shop I usually go to, because I remember in the last time that the mask mandate came off, it was still like 70-30, something like that. This time it was actually completely switched. So this gives people the off-ramp. It gives people with online activism for something to argue about, which is different. And most importantly, they can kind of just let it all slip and die. I mean, at this point, I don't think that there is a single national mask mandate. I could be totally wrong, left in the country. There may be some school mask mandates that are expiring in like 15 days. But absent that, it's over. And so Biden apparently is going to lay out his whatever next phase of the pandemic. I would say don't even touch it, man. Just be like, hey, look, we declared victory. We won. That's great. We remember the 800,000 Americans who died from COVID. It was a terrible tragedy, but we're all moving on here. We see the vaccine mandates end in New York City. We see the mask mandates expire. Even Marshall, you're from Oregon, even over in Oregon, we're seeing this. So this is a blessing in disguise, I think, really, to Biden for the end of COVID, because otherwise, let's say Ukraine had not happened, how much COVID talk we're going to be having at this table? I think it would be astronomical.
So it's definitely over in terms of the public caring all that much about it.
Right.
But in terms of what's actually happening, I mean, there's still, 1,000 deaths a day or something like that?
Yeah, but I mean, the public has calibrated itself to that.
Right.
They're like, look,
I mean,
at this point, you're vaccinated or you're very old
right.
and you're very ill, and we're very sorry about that, but that's how it is.
In some ways, to Marshall's point, the bar has lowered to like, please, I just don't want to die in a nuclear war.
Yeah.
So as long as we're not dying in a nuclear war, everybody's like, you know, that Biden guy, maybe he's not doing as bad of a job as I thought he was.
Yeah.
But yeah, like people are generally, and by the way, to the sanctions thing too, I just want to add this for the record, is that I do think people are almost too much in favor of it, sanctions that would even hurt the Russian people. Like, I'm all in favor. Throw the book at the oligarchs, throw the book at Putin.
Yeah.
But in terms of, like, you know, the thing that I saw on Twitter the other day, all these people couldn't even use the subway in Moscow because they stopped Google Pay and Apple Pay or whatever.
They live in a pariah state now.
I mean, that's
their whole orientation towards the world changed overnight. And yeah, I'm in the 3% that said they did too much. There's like 3% of the public that agrees with us that it went too far in terms of hitting ordinary Russian citizens. But I recognize that's a very small minority view.
If you give people specifics, they might agree with us.
Look, I mean, here's the big problem. The big problem is that Russia's using vacuum bombs on civilians, like pretty much right as we speak right now. And I think the thing that's, and once again, once you, and this is why the polling on this has been, I'll be honest, like the polling is usually depressing. I think Americans with these have recognized nuance in a way that typically hasn't been allowed, in the sense that people say, look, we know that we could send in jets and troops and make a just pretty clear difference on the ground. But that being said, that could risk nuclear war. We don't want to engage in these wars of choice. But that being said, like there have to be consequences for this. And I know this is really tough to say, and it feels terrible saying it, but I just do not think we can allow as much as we can like this to stand.
So I think what's happening here, and what you're pointing to also in terms of the Google Pay and the Apple Pay, is when you put it specifically, my fear is not even necessarily that, you know, everybody can't use Google Pay and Apple Pay. It's we got to very clearly lay out here. And I think Biden is probably going to do this from what I've read from the excerpts is, hey, listen, if you stop, all of this will come back. The global financials, you're good. It's back. We can. There is just as an escalation ladder in war, there is a financial escalation ladder. You are vacuum bombing and using cluster munitions in cities. Just today, I saw this horrible video of it's like the Kiev TV tower, the comms getting completely blown out by a missile. There was another one, a fuel dump, I believe, at an airfield. Same thing. I mean, launched from the Navy. I mean, this is really catastrophic stuff. Also, it being hit in terms of critical infrastructure, bunkers for the Ukrainian military. All of that is happening. My only thing, and I do believe Biden is actually doing this. It's funny, I always have to end up praising him somehow, even though I don't necessarily want to. But I think having a level head whenever it comes to sanctions, being like, listen, these can all go back too. You can come back on this if you just stop what you're doing. Will that work? Probably not. So it's on that front where it could have some success. But we'll see. I mean, we don't know.
Here's what I'll say, Marshall, to your point, which I think is very compelling and very... I think that obviously the overwhelming majority of people agree with you that these actions by Russia cannot stand, and they should not stand, and they should pay a price. I care less about the price that they pay than what the end result is. Mm-hmm. And I do not see from our past history of levying devastating sanctions that are horrific for the public and waging this kind of financial warfare, economic warfare, which is what we're doing. I don't see that the results have ended in peace and better ties between those countries. Instead, what I see is situations where then authoritarian dictators, people like Putin, can use those sanctions to say, your problem isn't with me, it's with those people who are making your life miserable, and they have a point. And so ultimately, rather than providing that impetus to come back to the table, instead it hardens a population which, to this point, seems to be at least some significant chunk of it opposed to the war and more or less on our side of we got to de-escalate this thing. So that's the position I'm coming from is, number one, it is a moral position. The Russian people haven't done anything wrong and they don't deserve to have their lives turned upside down. But number two, it is a strategic and tactical position of I don't see the track record of where this has actually worked. And it feels to me a lot more of just a political response to feed that sense of like, we have to make them pay, we have to assert ourselves in the world, we have to do something.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on that real quick because I did a realignment episode that's coming out tomorrow on the sanctions issue. And look, it lines up with what you're saying. At the end of the day, the guest I have talks about how he wished, and he's a hawk, he was like, look, let's be honest, these types of devastating sanctions would have been more effective as a deterrent before the invasion happened. Mm-hmm. So if his ideal state would have been, Putin, if you go in, because once again, the Biden administration said he was going to go in. If you go in, this, and this would happen.
Make it clear.
You make it clear, you use them as a deterrent. To your point, once the actual invasion happens, you're most likely right. That's not going to change the actual behavior on the ground. But I think the point that's tough here is the bigger picture here is that we are trying to avoid a nuclear war. Yeah. So from my perspective, the reason why the sanctions are justified is when we are going to, look, we talked about this, like we're not going to let Finland and Sweden into NATO. Given just the risk of that, I think we have to say we are doing something else. Right. I just, morally speaking, cannot tell Europeans that for your own protection, you cannot join this alliance without also doing something affirmative too.
And I think on that front, it's interesting though, and this also gets to efficacy and around balance. Part of the reason, we've been talking about this, we're being led by the Europeans. We're not really in the driver's seat. Biden was against SWIFT, right? He was against taking Russia off of SWIFT. He was for keeping the oil transactions. It was the rest of Europe which went to Germany and said, you're going to get with the program here, buddy. They're the ones who are dragging them in terms of the European Union and us by proxy into what is happening here. So that's another area of this entire conflict, which I think is missing some analysis, which is that the Europeans themselves, who are asleep at the wheel for 40 years and doing all sorts of idiotic stuff, both on defense spending, nuclear policy, and so much more, have now woken up and are panicking, a literal mass panic in Poland, Romania. You know, Crystal, I was reading, luckily, by the way, thank God, the EU is not sending those fighter jets over to Ukraine, not out of the goodness of their heart, by the way. It's because they necessarily want to reduce. It's because the Poles and the Romanians are like, oh no, we
might need these jets.
We might need these jets, all right? We're not giving these things up. Period.
Yeah. Well, and also some of them are literally broken down. Like it's a beyond parody in that situation.
The other thing is they were supposed to take off from Poland, which Putin can interpret as this is NATO attacking us, which is World War III.
They were like, we are not dealing with this. They're like, we're the ones getting invaded.
Well,
we're not going
especially
to happen.
if you have pilots from Poland or another NATO country that are flying the planes in, then it's like even more. It was dicey.
Yes, I think focusing on that European part is key. And I'm actually really interested from the excerpts so far of what we've been said. By the way, we've been told any second now that the president's going to walk into the building, so we might cut away and start describing that. That's what Crystal's best at, given her long news experience. Yeah, I'm like,
he's there.
I can't do it.
He's there. He's walking.
Look at this. Senator Risch,
by the way,
Clyburn.
the most cringe thing I heard is that some congressmen get there like 10 hours early because their constituents, so they can shake the president's hand, because their constituents are like, I saw you on the TV.
Yeah.
Well, whatever. That from
they go, huh?
What state is that person from?
I don't know.
This is, I think, especially the case with Obama.
That's right.
And with Trump. I don't know if Biden has quite the same poll.
That's a good point.
It's not going to be your campaign photo.
It's still, yeah. I mean, although I will say, he is still a less divisive figure than, say, Barack Obama was. I mean, I happened to run in the Tea Party wave in 2010. I was there on the ground. It was not a pretty sight for me or anybody else of my sort of ideological leanings. But Barack Obama was totally, Democrats were running away from that guy in anything approaching a swing district or a conservative district. And the boogeymen for the Republicans are still Nancy Pelosi, which no one talks about. Everybody points to AOC, who is another one, and the squad members. But Nancy Pelosi has been like a leaden weight around the neck of congressional candidates since the time of me running for Congress more than a decade ago now. So here we go. He is now walking in.
All right, here we go.
You
We
see
just
him
got the
there. This is
standby.
already getting the
This is Crystal's time to shine, folks.
Does he know where he is? That's my first question.
Unknowable. He seems like he's with it. He's greeting the people there. I don't actually recognize any of those folks in particular. But I will say, as far as the picture thing goes, these members of Congress, especially the backbenchers, the angle to get the photo thing is like, this is a way that they can try to show their constituents that they're relevant. And so that's what it's really ultimately about. They do have part of why it looks
some
less
Ukrainian flags there in the background we can see there, Crystal.
Yep, and it looks more empty than usual because they still have, I think, some COVID seating assignment situation going on. And then the other thing that's noteworthy, and this is brand new, is there are no masks.
That's right.
And that's
Which Pelosi is not wearing tonight.
That is a new policy there, so that's part of why the optics are really different.
Did they give him his Adderall?
We're about to find out, Kyle.
Yeah, I feel like
maybe you should break down for us while we're taking this time what you think the recommended cocktail would be to get him on the top of his game for this.
Let me make a substantive point, though, which is that Biden generally, and I do mean this, he does rise to the occasion. Generally with these speeches. Remember the Bernie debate?
Well, that's what I was going to bring up.
Remember also not the Afghan press conference, the speech. Not the press conference where he did that weird thing where he put his elbows on the podium and he's like whispering, kind of like he does. But like the speech itself, I mean, look, I think it's muscle memory, but he's been doing this for a long time.
Muscle memory's a good theory.
At this time, like he actually is pretty good.
Yeah.
At rising to the occasion. I think he's about to take the podium there. So we're gonna cut away, guys. We'll be with everybody whenever after the show for an additional 1 hour live stream to break everything down.
Stay right here. Stay right here to watch the stream.
The whole speech.
And then we will be back. So don't go anywhere, guys. Check it out.
Yep. All right, guys. Here is the President of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, General. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, members of Congress and the Cabinet, Justice of the Supreme Court, my fellow Americans. Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, we meet as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, but most importantly, as Americans, with the duty to one another, to America, to the American people, to the Constitution, and an unwavering resolve that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. Thank you. 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. President Zelensky, to every Ukrainian, their fearlessness, their courage, their determination literally inspires the world. Groups of citizens blocking tanks with their bodies, everyone from students to retirees to teachers, turned soldiers defending their homeland. And in this struggle, President Zelensky said in his speech to the European Parliament, "Light will win over darkness." The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bright, she's strong, and she's resolved. Yes, we, the United States of America, stand with the Ukrainian people. Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying your European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how he would try to falsify and justify his aggression. We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable, along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others. Even Switzerland are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. We're choking Russia's access to technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it. The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. We're giving more than $1 billion of direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid the Ukrainian people as they defend their country and help ease their suffering. But let me be clear, our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. And we're clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos, but while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run. And a pound of Ukrainian people, the proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have. They've known 30 years of independence, have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world. And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers. Tonight, I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. America will lead that effort, releasing 30 million barrels of our own strategic petroleum reserve. And we stand ready to do more if necessary, united with our allies. These steps will help blunt gas prices here at home, but I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. While it shouldn't have taken something so terrible for people around the world to see what's at stake, now everyone sees it clearly. We see the unity among leaders of nations, a more unified Europe, a more unified West. We see unity among the people who are gathering in cities and large crowds around the world, even in Russia, to demonstrate their support for the people of Ukraine. In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment, and the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security. This is the real test, and it's going to take time. So let us continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world. We meet tonight in an America that has lived through two of the hardest years this nation has ever faced. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. I understand, like many of you did. My dad had to leave his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania to find work. So like many of you, I grew up in a family when the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the family. It had an impact. That's when one of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. Because people were hurting, we needed to act, and we did. Few pieces of legislation have done more at a critical moment in our history to lift us out of a crisis. It fueled our efforts to vaccinate the nation and combat COVID-19. It delivered immediate economic relief to tens of millions of Americans. It helped put food on the table. Remember those long lines of cars waiting for hours just to get a box of food put in their trunk. It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks, and it worked. It worked. It worked. We created jobs, lots of jobs. In fact, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year. More jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States of America. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years. And the first step in bringing fundamental change to our economy that hasn't worked for working people in this nation for too long. For the past 40 years, we were told The tax break for those at the top and benefits would trickle down and everyone would benefit. But that trickle-down theory led to a weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits, and a widening gap between the top and everyone else in nearly a century. Look, Vice President Harris and I ran for office, and I realize we have fundamental disagreements on this, but ran for office with a new economic vision for America. Invest in America, educate Americans, grow the workforce, build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, because we know when the middle class grows, the poor go way up and the wealthy do very well. America used to have the best roads, bridges, and airports on earth, and now our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. We won't be able to compete for the jobs of the 21st century if we don't fix it. That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends who joined to invest and rebuild America, the single biggest investment in history. It was a bipartisan effort, and I want to thank the members of both parties who worked to make it happen. We're done talking about infrastructure weeks. We're now talking about an infrastructure decade. And look, it's going to transform America, to put us on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world, particularly China. I've told Xi Jinping it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. We'll create good jobs for millions of Americans, modernizing roads, airports, ports, waterways, all across America. And we'll do it to withstand the devastating effects of climate change and promote environmental justice. We'll build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Begin to replace the poisonous lead pipes so every child, every American has clean water to drink at home and at school. We're going to provide affordable, high-speed internet for every American, rural, suburban, urban, and tribal communities. 4,000 projects have already been announced. Many of you have announced them in your districts. And tonight, I'm announcing that this year, we will start fixing over 65,000 miles of highway and 1,500 bridges in disrepair. And folks, when we use taxpayers' dollars to rebuild America, we're going to do it by buying America. Buy American products. Support American jobs. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year to keep this country safe and secure. There's been a law on the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration, Democrat or Republican, says they'll do it, but we're actually doing it. We'll buy America to make sure everything from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the steel on highway guardrails is made in America from beginning to end. All of it, all of it. But folks, to compete for the jobs of the future, we also need a level playing field with China and other competitors. That's why it's so important to pass the Bipartisan Innovation Act sitting in Congress that will make record investments in emerging technologies and American manufacturing. We used to invest almost 2% of our GDP in research and development. We don't now. China is. Let me give you one example why it's so important to pass. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closely, you'll see a field of dreams. the ground on which America's future will be built. That's where Intel, the American company that helped build Silicon Valley, is going to build a $20 billion semiconductor megasite, up to 8 state-of-the-art factories in one place, 10,000 new jobs. And in those factories, the average job about $135,000 a year. Some of the most sophisticated manufacturing in the world to make computer chips the size of a fingertip, that power the world in everyday lives, from smartphones, technology, the internet, technology is yet to be invented. But that's just the beginning. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who was here tonight, I don't know where Pat is. Pat, there you go, Pat, stand up. Pat came to see me and he told me they're ready to increase their investment from $20 billion to $100 billion. That would be the biggest investment in manufacturing in American history. And all they're waiting for is for you to pass this bill. So let's not wait any longer. Send it to my desk, I'll sign it, and we'll really take off in a big way. And folks, Intel is not alone. There's something happening in America. Just look around and you'll see an amazing story. The rebirth of pride that comes from stamping products made in America. The revitalization of American manufacturing. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. All told, 369,000 new manufacturing jobs were created in America last year alone. Folks, powered by people I've met like JoJo Burgess from generations of union steelworkers in Pittsburgh, who's here with us tonight. Where are you, JoJo? There you go. Thanks, buddy. As Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says, it's time to bury the label Rust Belt. It's time to see what used to be called the Rust Belt become the home of a significant resurgence of manufacturing. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages, too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than almost anyone predicted. But the pandemic meant that businesses had a hard time hiring enough people because of the pandemic to keep up production in their factories. So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed. The panic also disrupted the global supply chain. Factories close. When that happens, it takes longer to make goods and get them to the warehouses, to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars last year. 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went way up, especially used vehicles as well. And so we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages. Folks, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. Look, economists call this increasing the productive capacity of our economy. I call it building a better America. My plan to fight inflation will lower your cost and lower the deficit. 17 Nobel laureates in economics said my plan will ease long-term inflationary pressures. Top business leaders, and I believe most Americans, support the plan. And here's the plan. First, cut the cost of prescription drugs. We pay more for the same drug produced by the same company in America than any other country in the world. Just look at insulin. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. In Virginia, I met a 13-year-old boy, the handsome young man standing up there, Joshua Davis. He and his dad both have type 1 diabetes, which means they need insulin every single day. Insulin costs about $10 a vial to make. That's what it costs the pharmaceutical company. But drug companies charge families like Joshua and his dad up to 30 times that amount. I spoke with Joshua's mom. Imagine what it's like to look at your child who needs insulin to stay healthy and have no idea how in God's name you're going to be able to pay for it. What it does to your family, but what it does to your dignity, your ability to look your child in the eye, to be the parent you expect yourself to be. I really mean to think about that. That's what I think about. You know, yesterday, Joshua's here tonight, but yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, buddy, by the way. For Joshua and 200,000 other young people with type 1 diabetes, let's cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month so everyone can afford it. And drug companies will do very, very well, their profit margin. While we're at it, I know we have great disagreements on this floor of this. Let's let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. They already set the price for VA drugs. Look, the American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families with Affordable Care Act plans to save them $2,400 a year on their health premiums. Let's close the coverage gap and make these savings permanent. And second, let's cut energy costs for families, an average of $500 a year by combating climate change. Let's provide an investment tax credits to weatherize your home and your business, to be energy efficient and get a tax credit for it. Double America's clean energy production in solar, wind, and so much more. Lower the price of electric vehicles, saving another $80 a month that you're not going to have to pay at the pump. Folks, the third thing we can do to change the standard of living for hardworking folks is cut the cost of child care. Cut the cost of child care. Folks, if you live in a major city in America, you pay up to $14,000 a year for child care per child. I was a single dad for 5 years, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of help, though. I had a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister that really helped. But middle class and working folks shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income to care for the young children. My plan would cut the cost of child care in half for most families. and help parents, including millions of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they couldn't afford childcare, to be able to get back to work, generating economic growth. But my plan doesn't stop there. It also includes home and long-term care, more affordable housing, pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. All these will lower costs to families. And under my plan, nobody, let me say this again, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny. I may be wrong, but my guess is if we took a secret ballot in this floor, that we'd all agree that the present tax system ain't fair. We have to fix it. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but let's make corporations and wealthy Americans start paying their fair share. Look, last year, like Chris Coons and Tom Carper and my distinguished Congresswoman, we come from the land of corporate America. There are more corporations incorporated in America than every other state in America combined. And I still won 36 years in a row. The point is, even they understand you should pay just a fair share. Last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 companies earned $40 billion in profit and paid zero in federal taxes. Now look, it's not fair. That's why I proposed the 15% minimum tax rate for corporations. And that's why in the G7 and other meetings overseas, we're able to put together, I was able to be somewhat helpful, 130 countries agree on a global minimum tax rate. So companies can't get out of paying their taxes at home by shipping jobs and factories overseas. It'll raise billions of dollars. That's why I propose closing loopholes for the very wealthy who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher and a firefighter. So that's my plan, but we'll go in more detail later. We will grow the economy, lower the cost of families. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this done. We all know we've got to make changes. Folks, and while you're at it, confirm my nominees for the Federal Reserve, which plays a critical role in fighting inflation. My plan will not only lower costs and give families a fair shot, it will lower the deficit. The previous administration not only ballooned the deficit with those tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, it undermined the watchdogs, the job of those to keep pandemic relief funds being wasted. Remember we had those debates about whether or not those watchdogs should be able to see every day how much money was being spent, where was it going to the right place? But in my administration, the watchdogs are back. And we're going to go after the criminals who stole billions of relief money meant for small business and millions of Americans. Tonight, I'm announcing that the Justice Department will soon name a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. And look, I think we all agree, thank you. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half of what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. Lowering your cost also meant demanding more competition. I'm a capitalist, but capitalism without competition is not capitalism. Capitalism without competition is exploitation. It drives up profits. When corporations have to compete, their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. And folks, and as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch. Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure your loved ones get the care they deserve and that they inspect and they will look at closely. We're also going to cut costs to keep the economy going strong and giving workers a fair shot, provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on skills, not just their degrees. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act and paid leave. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and extend the child tax credit so no one has to raise a family in poverty. Let's increase Pell Grants, increase our historic support for HBCUs, and invest in what Jill, our First Lady who teaches full-time, calls America's best-kept secret, community colleges. Look, let's pass the PRO Act. When a majority of workers want to form a union, they shouldn't be able to be stopped. When we invest in our workers and we build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out together, we can do something we haven't done in a long time, build a better America. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. That doesn't even count the close to 1 million people who sit at a dining room table or a kitchen table and look at an empty chair because they lost somebody. But I also know this, because of the progress we've made, because of your resilience and the tools that we have been provided by this Congress, tonight I can say we're moving forward safely back to more normal routines. We've reached a new moment in the fight against COVID-19, where severe cases are down to a level not seen since July of last year. Just a few days ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a new mask guidelines. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free. And based on projections, more of the country will reach a point across the next couple of weeks. And thanks to the progress we've made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives. I know some are talking about living with COVID-19, but tonight I say that we never will just accept living with COVID-19. We'll continue to combat the virus as we do other diseases. And because this virus mutates and spreads, we have to stay on guard. And here are 4 common sense steps as we move forward safely, in my view. First, stay protected with vaccines and treatments. We know how incredibly effective vaccines are. If you're vaccinated and boosted, you have the highest degree of protection. We'll never give up on vaccinating more Americans. Now, I know parents with kids under 5 are eager to see their vaccines authorized for their children. Scientists are working hard to get that done. We'll be ready with plenty of vaccines if and when they do. We're all ready. We are also ready with antiviral treatments. If you get COVID-19, the Pfizer pill reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. I've ordered more pills than anyone in the world has. Pfizer is working overtime to get us 1 million pills this month and more than double that next month. And now we're launching the Test to Treat initiative. So people can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost. Folks, if you're immunocompromised or have some other vulnerability, we have treatments and free high-quality masks. We're leaving no one behind or ignoring anyone's needs as we move forward. On testing, we've made hundreds of millions of tests available, and you can order them for free to your doorstep. And we've already ordered free tests. If you already ordered free tests tonight, I'm announcing you can order another group of tests. Go to covidtest.gov starting next week, and you can get more tests. Second, we must prepare for new variants. Over the past, we've gotten much better at detecting new variants. If necessary, we'll be able to develop new vaccines within 100 days instead of maybe months or years. And if Congress provides the funds we need, we'll have new stockpiles of tests, masks, pills ready if needed. I can't promise a new variant won't come, but I can promise you we'll do everything within our power to be ready if it does. Third, we can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. We achieved this because we provided free vaccines, treatments, tests, and masks. Of course, continuing this costs money, so I'll not surprise you. I'll be back to see you all. And I'm going to soon send a request to Congress. The vast majority of Americans have used these tools and may want again. We may need them again, so I expect Congress, and I hope you'll pass that quickly. Fourth, we'll continue vaccinating the world. We've sent 475 million vaccine doses to 112 countries, more than any nation on earth. We won't stop, because you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. The vaccine can stop the spread of these diseases. You know, we've lost so much in COVID-19. Time with one another. The worst of all, the loss of life. Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. Look. We can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. I recently visited New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Mora was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them that we were forever in debt for their sacrifices, and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety of every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works. Investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers. That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities. I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I ask Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence. Pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines that hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. The most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and have it counted. And look, it's under assault. In state after state, new laws have been passed. Not only to suppress the vote, we've been there before, but to subvert the entire election. We can't let this happen. Tonight I call on the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, pass the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. And while you're at it, pass the Disclose Act so Americans know who's funding our election. Look, tonight, I like to honor someone who dedicated his life to serve this country. Justice Breyer, an Army veteran, constitutional scholar, retiring Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, thank you for your service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Get up, stand, let them see you. Thank you. We all know, no matter what your ideology, we all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds, who continue in Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence. A former top litigator in private practice, a former federal public defender, from a family of public school educators and police officers. She's a consensus builder. Since she's been nominated, she's received a broad range of support, including the Fraternal Order of Police and former judges supported by Democrats and Republicans. Folks, if we're to advance liberty and justice, we need to secure our border and fix the immigration system. And as you might guess, I think we can do both. At our border, we've installed new technology like cutting-edge scanners to better detect drug smuggling. We've set up joint patrols with Mexico and Guatemala to catch more human traffickers. We're putting in place dedicated immigration judges in a significant larger number so families fleeing persecution and violence can have their cases heard faster, and those who don't legitimately hear can be sent back. We're screening, we're securing commitments, and supporting partners in South and Central America to host more refugees and secure their own borders. We can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led a generation of immigrants to this land, my forebears and many of yours. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those with temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Revise our laws so businesses have workers they need and families don't wait decades to reunite. It's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart thing to do. That's why the immigration reform is supported by everyone from labor unions to religious leaders to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let's get it done once and for all. Folks, advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans. And folks, for our LGBTQ plus Americans, let's finally get the Bipartisan Equality Act to my desk. The onslaught of state laws targeting transgender Americans and their families, it's simply wrong. And I said last year, especially to our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential. Folks, as I've just demonstrated, while it often appears we do not agree, and that we do agree on a lot more things than we acknowledge. I signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year, from preventing government shutdowns, to protecting Asian Americans from still too common hate crimes, to reforming military justice, and will soon be strengthening the Violence Against Women Act that I first wrote 3 decades ago. And it's important. It's important for us to show the nation we can come together and do big things. So tonight I'm offering a unity agenda for the nation. 4 big things we can do together, in my view. First, beat the opioid epidemic. There's so much we can do. Increase funding for prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. Get rid of outdated rules and stop doctors from prescribing treatments. Stop the flow of illicit drugs by working with state and local law enforcement to go after the traffickers. And if you're suffering from addiction, you should know you're not alone. I believe in recovery, and I celebrate the 23 million Americans in recovery. Second, let's take on mental health, especially among our children whose lives and education have been turned upside down. The American Rescue Plan gave schools money to hire teachers and help students make up for lost learning. I urge every parent to make sure your school does just that. They have the money. We can all play a part. Sign up to be a tutor or a mentor. Children were also struggling before the pandemic, bullying, violence, trauma, and the harms of social media. As Frances Haugen, who is here tonight with us, has shown, we must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Folks, thank you. Thank you for the courage you showed. It's time to strengthen privacy protections, ban targeted advertising to children, demand tech companies stop collecting personal data on our children, and let's get all Americans the mental health services they need. More people can turn for help and full parity between physical and mental health care if we treat it that way in our insurance. Look, The third piece of that agenda is support our veterans. Veterans are the backbone and the spine of this country. They're the best of us. I've always believed that we have a sacred obligation to equip those we send to war and care for those in their family when they come home. My administration providing assistance in job training, housing, and now helping lower-income veterans get VA care debt-free. And our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers, one being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan over 40 times. These burn pits that incinerate waste, the waste of war, medical and hazardous material, jet fuel, and so much more. And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world, never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops. But I am committed to find out everything we can, committed to military families like Danielle Robinson from Ohio, the widow of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He was born a soldier, Army National Guard, combat medic in Kosovo and Iraq, stationed near Baghdad, just yards from burn pits the size of football fields. Danielle is here with us tonight. They love going to Ohio State football games. Love building Legos with their daughter. But cancer from prolonged exposure to burn pits ravaged Heath's lungs and body. Danielle says Heath was a fighter to the very end. He didn't know how to stop fighting, and neither did she. Through her pain, she found purpose to demand that we do better. Tonight, Danielle, we are going to do better. The VA is pioneering new ways of linking toxic exposure to disease, already helping more veterans get benefits. And tonight, I'm announcing we're expanding eligibility to veterans suffering from 9 respiratory cancers. I'm also calling on Congress to pass a law to make sure veterans devastated by toxic exposure in Iraq and Afghanistan finally get the benefits and the comprehensive health care they deserve. And fourth and last, let's end cancer as we know it. This is personal. This is personal to me and to Jill and to Kamala and so many of you. So many of you have lost someone you love. Husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in America, second only to heart disease. Last month, I announced the plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot that President Obama asked me to lead 6 years ago. Our goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years, and I think we can do better than that. Turn cancers from death sentences into treatable diseases. More support for patients and their families. To get there, I call on Congress to fund what I call ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, patterned after DARPA in the Defense Department. Projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more to make our forces more safer and be able to wage war with more clarity. ARPA will have a singular purpose: to drive breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's and diabetes, and more. A unity agenda for the nation. We can do these things. It's within our power, and I don't see a partisan edge to any one of those four things. My fellow Americans, tonight, we've gathered in this sacred space, a citadel of democracy, in this Capitol. Generation after generation of Americans have debated great questions, amid great strife, and have done great things. We fought for freedom, expanded liberty, debated totalitarianism and terror. We built the strongest, freest, and most prosperous nation the world has ever known. Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test, protect freedom and liberty, expand fairness and opportunity, and we will save democracy. As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity. We're the only nation on earth that has always turned every crisis we've faced into an opportunity. The only nation that can be defined by a single word: possibilities. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time. And we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
Joe Biden's first State of the Union. One of the things that we were sort of speculating about going into this was whether or not he would sort of throw the original speech out,
right,
and totally rework it to reflect the events in Ukraine, or whether he would just take the old speech with the whole laundry list of whatever that was going to be and just stick it on with the Ukraine piece. That's clearly the route that he went to.
Yeah, that's right.
There was
Ukraine
no
at the very top and everything else.
Yeah, there was no
right.
reframing of the rest of the speech. It was, we'll get the Ukraine piece out of the way, and then we'll go to effectively the laundry list of what the agenda items are.
Yeah, so on Ukraine, I mean, these are obviously is going to be the most talked about. And in terms of ratings, just so people understand, most people only watch the first 15 minutes. Most people know that who are in the White House. And so the reason being that they stick the most important parts that they want people to take away. So we polled what we thought was the most important part of the Ukraine speech. First, an unwavering commitment and a threat to Putin, which is do not cross the NATO border. It is a tripwire, and we will mount our full force and power, defend every inch, is what Biden said. And then another one, trying to allay fears of a general nuclear war. Let's go and take a listen to that.
Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries, including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. But I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Well, while it shouldn't.
Those were really important there in terms of both the NATO commitment that's being watched obviously in the Kremlin, and then the second one in terms of trying to allay the concerns there. But I think, for all of us, I guess let's just start, Kyle, with you. What are some of the top recollections from, obviously Ukraine was the top news, but general breakdown of the speech, I think it clocked in around an hour and 10 minutes, a little shorter side of a State of the Union. What were your general impressions here?
So I got two things that I thought were very negative, and then one thing that I thought was positive.
Sure.
The negatives are he was stumbling and bumbling a lot. Optics.
No taking away from that.
Listen, it's hard to watch. There's just no denying that.
Yeah, so that was a negative. The other negative thing was, especially in the second half of the speech, it was just a lot of standard politician fluff. I was getting so aggravated because he was going down basically his list of Build Back Better agenda items, and he was saying, we got to do this, we should do this, we should do that. You didn't get Build Back Better passed. You didn't propose standalone bills on that. You didn't break out your executive order pen to do any of that. So it's just literally a virtue signal speech. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And so I was really frustrated. It's almost like the more you know about politics, then the more angry you get, because you're like, I know that this is all just fake and theater, and it's not like we're actually going to do these things.
Yes.
But I will say the one positive thing is the speech was, especially for the first half or so after the Ukraine stuff, it was very populist. So he did sort of lean in on we got these new factories now opening up in Ohio and in Michigan, semiconductor factories and some other factories. And that's you made the comment, Sagar, as we were watching. That's exactly something Trump would have done.
Yeah, and it was a great idea.
And that is smart politics. I love how he leaned into the Buy America stuff. So the only positive stuff is it was a lot more populist than I thought it would be, but the negatives, again, stumbling and bumbling and just standard politician fluff.
Yeah,
Before we get to Marshall, because it relates to your discussion there of how he did lean into some populist rhetoric around, bringing jobs back home, Made in America. He said, we want to see that Made in America stamp. He talked about the PRO Act. It's always something that I'm looking for. He highlighted a union steelworker who was in the audience. He also made a sort of populist contrast between the Democratic COVID relief plan and the Republican corporate tax cuts, which went largely to the 1%. That was not received well by the Republicans in the audience, but I actually think this may have been one of the best moments for Biden of the State of the Union speech. Let's take a listen to that.
Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind.
That's a good contrast. It's one they should be making all the time.
And an undeniable fact.
Yes, and I mean, it's just factually accurate. They should be making that sort of contrast and comparison all of the time. He did talk some about raising taxes on the corporations. There was less talk, ahead of time. There was some like, he's going to go hard on the deficit. There's a little bit of deficit talk that I don't love, but he didn't go into that in too much detail. To me, the biggest problem is, what are people really going to take away from this? The Ukraine part, I think, that's going to stand alone. He made some news there in terms of the U.S. and their allies are going to release 60 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves. Also making the news that the U.S. is going to ban Russian flights here in America. And, the strength of the message there, I think, is kind of stands on its own. Beyond that, the domestic agenda, it's a laundry list. There's no emphasis on what things he actually prioritizes to get done. There's no plan to actually get any of these things done. And I loved how it, the 3/4 of the way through mark, he's like, and now this is the unity agenda. It's like, well, what was the rest of it? That was the disunity agenda.
Right.
So I think to your point, Kyle, what is so frustrating about that is that, listen, it's a tough landscape. We get the realities of divided government, 50 senators. You got to get everybody on board. You got to persuade Joe Manchin and Buck as fossil fuel donors and everybody else. But you have the power of the pen, and there are executive orders that you could issue and take power into your own hands. Those issues were somehow completely left off the table and unacknowledged in terms of things that he could actually do. The one exception to that, which I think is important and significant, touches on something that we were saying before going in this about calling out the corporations that are jacking up prices and contributing to inflation. He did talk about these shipping cartels This is something David Dayen has been doing as per usual. Fantastic reporting on. Apparently, the shipping industry, the ocean shipping industry, is now dominated by 3 alliances. Those 3 cartels make up 80% of the global shipping industry. That is massively up from 30% as recently as 2011. So Biden very clear on actions they were going to take. That is an area where he has the ability to take more aggressive actions and potentially have an impact. So that part I did like.
Yeah, what did you think, Marshall? What were your main takeaways from the speech?
Yeah, 2 things based on what Crystal and Kyle said. So number 1 would be the Ukraine statement did exactly what it needed to say. It said, this is not a person who thinks he's in this weird manliness battle with Vladimir Putin. This is the person who very much, and this is hard, like actually has his finger, and I think on a personal level, on the pulse of where the American public broadly is.
Yeah.
We don't stand for this. We back our allies. We back Europe. We want the energy independence issues, but we are not going to commit troops. We are not going to escalate. There is not going to be a nuclear war. That is the number 1 thing he had to convey. And then 2, and I was just thinking about this because, Kyle, as you suggested, we watched a, segment from Obama before this, and I was just thinking the second half of the speech, the laundry list of policies we know aren't going to pass is just exhausting.
It is.
And I think the Obama energy that I think could be translated into the executive orders you two are speaking to is just, look, we all know this is a fake list that we put up. It's not going to translate into anything. I'm not really interested, and I think most people aren't interested in hearing things that aren't going to happen are pie in the sky. I would like him to say, here are these 5 issues I care about. Here are 5 executive orders that I'm signing, like you all said, first thing tomorrow morning, and that is what my agenda is. There's a huge opportunity for a politician to just get away from the kabuki theater. I think Obama saw the kabuki and was exhausted by it, and then you got condescending Obama, which wasn't productive. But I think Biden, because Biden's not cynical, Biden can't, on 5 different levels, he can't do Professor Biden, but I actually think he would have an opportunity to channel that in a productive direction.
That's actually a good thing that he can't do Professor Biden.
Yeah,
you know what I think of regarding your comments, Marshall, is when Andrew Yang made that comment on the debate stage of
what are we doing
we're
here?
all up here wearing our makeup, like posturing, and just kind of letting the viewers in on, we know what's really going on here. That is, I think that would be very refreshing for the American people. And we were talking, as you get to the end of the speech, and it's just like, and LGBTQ, and women's rights. And gun rights. And I mean, listen, I'm on board with all of these things. I'm not saying I'm not. But you also see that there's a clear checking off of, I've got this constituency that needs to hear from me. I've got that constituency that needs to hear from me. And so that's what kind of the latter half of the speech involves, and especially when you do have a president like Joe Biden who does not have a grand vision, who is not able to seize the moment of what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and say, this is why we have to have this agenda at home, why I'm going to introduce, whether it's a nuclear New Deal or something that people can really lean into. He just, he doesn't have that vision. He's never had that vision. His political ideology is like a basket of sort of like anecdotes and truisms and whatever Lindsey Graham will agree to.
Right. I'll start with the good part. And I do want to give good credit for this. And the Intel factory, we spent time here on Breaking Points and specifically made a point to do a good news segment because this is one of the seminal, most important pieces of American manufacturing that is coming here and is because of U.S. government policy. Biden did exactly what any American president should do, including what Trump would have done. Touted it, also pointing to where it is being built. We thought it was so important, we went ahead and pulled a clip. So let's take a listen to that before we get into some of my analysis.
The corporations have to compete. Their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers and moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. And folks, And as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch.
Apologies, that one was actually about inflation, but that was important.
That was the thing I was talking about with the shipping cartels.
Also important, but here's what he said. He said, quote, this is, if you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you're going to find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closer, you're going to see a field of dreams, the ground on which America's future will be built. This is where Intel, the American company that helped Silicon Valley, is going to build its $20 billion semiconductor megasite. And there was also a portion of the speech where he listed off again and again, we need to make cars in America again. We make semiconductors in America again. It's time to make things in America again. You could have taken that straight out of a Trump 2016 speech, and that's vitally important. On the bad part, look, there's no getting around it on the delivery, and we have to be sensitive in the way that we talk about it, but he had significant stumbling, slurring of his words at certain points, and it's difficult to watch. It really is one of those moments where you're watching an older person, and it's just hard to see, especially when this is the President of the United States, and you think, oh man, he got 3 more years of this. He's got to stay in his term. And I don't say this in a disrespectful manner. It's just simply a manner of observation. At times, the speech was good. Otherwise, we have, interruptions of stuttering, of coughing. You're going to see that on Fox News all day long. So it's a significant part, and we can't downplay that. But from a policy perspective, here was my biggest problem, which is that on the energy side, and again, I do believe this is where we have a potential bipartisan coalition, didn't say the word nuclear once. Not once did it appear in the speech. I think it's specifically because of the reason why everything I'm holding here, this is the laundry list part. The vast majority, it's written by these Democratic consultants who are like, well, the activist groups want this. You got to talk about gun control. Check. It's a tick box State of the Union, right? Everybody could have predicted this based upon constituencies in D.C., and there is a very anti-nuclear force here. There's no real higher thinking within the speech in order to try and unite everything around a bigger agenda and not some same old crap that everybody has heard a million times before. So, look, I give praise for the intel part of the speech. I thought that was important. On Ukraine, I do think he did a good job. But like I said, on the delivery point, that you can't take that away. It is just something. What polls have we done on the show? The vast majority of Americans think that Biden has, lost a step.
I mean, we just talked about in the pre-show Gallup, the number one issue for people is economy, and the number 2 is like government leadership,
yes,
which kind of ties
like
into
a nebulous term, but it means something.
Yes,
right?
So what you're saying there. One thing that struck me is, we were reading through the text of the speech while he's delivering it, and it was very clear this was one of the excerpts that they released to the press ahead of time on inflation. This was supposed to be a line that he goes in for and that he nails, and all the Democrats are like, yes, yay, that was amazing. And he delivers it weakly, and then he coughs. So it's, those are the sort of things that, look, that was supposed to be a moment. That was supposed to be a crescendo in the speech. He's unable to do it. And you can say it's theatrics and it's political, it's just optics and whatever. But listen, when people are looking at their president and wondering if this person is going to be able to avert nuclear war, these are the sort of signs and signals that they may be considering in that context. I mean, listen, to me, given what is happening overseas, there's a very clear agenda that you could lay out that ties in 3 things that he did to a small degree in this speech and make those the major focuses. We need to make things in America. I mean, beef that section up. Yes, he talked about it. Make that one whole theme of the speech. Number 2, we have to end our dependence on fossil fuels. This is making us vulnerable in terms of national security. It's causing you to have to pay more at the pump. We need to state now clearly this is where we're going and do more of the calling out the corporations over inflation that we saw there. When you have those pieces as part of like 1,000 other things, it all gets lost, and none of that was connected back to what people are seeing day in and day out in the news right now with regards to Russia and Ukraine.
Look, if he actually meant a lot of the stuff he said there, I'd be out here defending him. Like, if I thought he was fighting even a little bit for the stuff he listed as his agenda in like the second half of it, I'd be defending him. But we know he didn't. We know that they delinked the bills. We know only the weak infrastructure bill got passed, and Build Back Better died, and Manchin went back on his word, and Pramila Jayapal, and a lot of the progressives look stupid except a handful who said, I'm not voting for that thing. You guys aren't sticking by the original deal. So, but that's the thing is, again, it all goes back. It's just a virtue signal speech. Now, I will say one more thing. Some of the mess ups that he had, I tweeted about 2 of them. One of them, he was talking about the issue with opioid overdoses and fentanyl, and he said, stop doctors prescribing treatments.
Yeah, right.
That was weird. And then he also, when he was talking about Ukraine, at one point he said, a pound of Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
And that was just, like, these things were sort of sprinkled in. Then there was the cough that you talked about. There's a number of, like, very big coughs. I mean, the cough, what are you going to do? You can't help that. And he also was heckled at one point, or at least one point. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene said something about build that wall.
They were chanting build the wall.
Right, yeah.
It sounded a bit like her. What were you saying, Marshall?
Yeah, I want to build on something which takes it back to what we were saying before we actually watched it, which was this debate over vision and what Biden could say. And hearing what you were just saying, Crystal, what I've realized the issue is, it's not just that Biden doesn't have his version of the New Deal or the FDR framing. It's that he and his team, and I put this more on the team than him, they're not able to have events happen. Like, once again, Biden did not cause the Ukraine crisis to happen. Biden did not cause inflation in that super direct way. There's this big, broader conversations. People are pissed at me for saying that, but it's true. But he needs to be, as an effective politician, someone who could take those events and tell a story about those events and translate them into an agenda. Like you were saying with energy or nuclear, he should take, this thing happened in Ukraine. We all feel this. This leads into the following agenda that reflects the world we're experiencing today. And that is what he can do. I don't think he could be FDR. No, and frankly, like, didn't Obama try to do, what was it? Oh, Obama tried to do the new foundation. I remember this. Like, back in 2009, they tried to coin their own version of New Deal. It doesn't work. So that's not my expectation. But they could not tell a story. It was so disjointed.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, Rahm Emanuel famously, not one to often quote Rahm Emanuel, but said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, and he was right.
Lord knows he's got an abundance of crises that he could work with here. We're living through a huge one right now. I mean, not only with the tail end of the pandemic, but actually staring face to face with the potential of the annihilation of the human race and through nuclear holocaust. So listen, that if there was ever a time to rally the American people around a set of goals that would actually move us into the future, now is a moment when you could do that. There was one other small note I wanted to make, and then we've got Marianne Williamson on the line who can join us here. There was a report from the Washington Post that an early draft of the speech included a call for a ban on stock trading, something that I think all of us have been looking at. We've covered it a lot on Breaking Points and what politicians have said about that. Now, Biden, to his credit, his entire time in the Senate, it was his policy to not buy and trade stocks. So he has a lot of credibility on that issue. And yet, somehow, somewhere along the lines, that didn't make it into the laundry list. All these other things, which are not going to happen, are in the laundry list. And this issue, which has bipartisan interest and bipartisan legislation that could actually potentially be passed, gets pulled from the speech.
Yeah, so instead we got a piece on banning targeted ads for kids based on huckster Frances Haugen from the Facebook whistleblower. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm really glad that portion made it in here on the last part. Look, obviously that's a totally ridiculous thing that it got taken out. I think we all know she was sitting up there on the dais and probably took it out.
Nancy's got some tricks. She got some tricks she needs to make. Yeah, look, listen, it's not hard to figure out.
He couldn't risk her ripping the speech up if that were. I'm joking. I want to give a special shout out to Jon Stewart. Burn Pits did make it into the State of the Union in terms of getting funding to those veterans. Never would have happened without Jon Stewart, without his tireless activism on this and pressing the VA secretary, making him look like a complete fool in that interview. Getting something mentioned in the President's State of the Union is a tremendous win whenever it comes to that level of activism. So, John, and for the many vets out there who suffered, I'm sorry that it took 15 freaking years and a bunch of activism, but it did finally at least make it in there. Now let's hope let's make the next State of the Union for the stock trading ban. We've got to get it in there.
Yeah.
Because without it, I don't think it has a prayer.
At least Havana syndrome was not mentioned.
That's right.
So
That's right. Burn pits
highlight.
is much more of a noble cause than Havana syndrome. Indeed. And one of those has congressional funding and not the other one. You can guess
and
which.
Remember how much he had to fight for the 9/11 victims, too. Jon Stewart got the funding for the 9/11 victims. That's right.
So many years.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and bring in Marianne Williamson. She, of course, is a former presidential candidate. She also has a Substack called Transform with Marianne Williamson, where you can find many of her thoughts. I highly recommend that you do that. Great friend of all of us. Great to see you, Marianne.
Good to see you, Marianne.
Oh, it's always good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure. So just give us your high-level thoughts. What were your big takeaways from the speech? Maybe your sort of like highlights and lowlights.
Well, I thought he was both better and worse than you guys did. I thought his energy was great. And I think, maybe because I'm older than you are, and a lot of Americans are, and a lot of voting Americans are, wouldn't be quite so down on him because he slurs a word every once in a while. Also, there's a lot of talk about disabilities in America, and we knew that he had a stutter as a child. So I don't know. I think his energy actually was quite wonderful. I thought he had just the right tone about Ukraine. And if this was the Joe Biden that was out there every day, we would be in a far better position for the for the midterms. I did not feel he was sleepy tonight. I thought he was giving it his all. And I like that. And now what Kyle was saying about how many of those things that he said were just performative at a certain point because they were things that are in the Build Back Better bill. He needs to be out there saying to the American people, we will have those things. We would have had them if the Build Back Better bill had been passed. This is why I need you to elect Democrats so that we will have them, which of course he couldn't have done in tonight's speech too much. There were things he did not mention that I thought were really sad. There was no mention of race in America. There was no mention, even though he talked about insulin, that was great, capping the price on insulin, even though he talked about more ability to negotiate drug prices. This man could, once again, as Kyle was saying, he could call a national medical emergency and expand Medicare to everyone. He could have used tonight to say, I'm canceling the college loan debt. He could have said, I'm using tonight to declassify marijuana. So I thought that in many ways he was better than I expected. But the man is not, the things that are disappointing to me, not that I would have expected it to be much different. Even at the beginning, when he said, what the American Rescue Plan did. What the American Rescue Plan did was to give people a temporary fix for what has become a permanentized structural economic injustice in this country. And I don't think he lives in a world, in his own experience and in his own mind, where he sees how structurally unjust the system has become. But in terms of the worldview that he does have, where he's trying to fix it for some people, I actually think he did better tonight than I would have expected.
That's interesting. Marianne, what you've always done a very good job of, especially during the campaign, was connecting, Bailey politics to a kind of a higher level of the way that people are feeling about the country. We led into the show talking about how a record number of Americans would rate the economy as poor, say that the country's simply on the wrong track. I personally didn't feel as if there was enough in the speech in order to speak directly to that feeling. What was your assessment on that front?
Well, you know what, Tyler? He lives in a world where he doesn't think America is on the wrong track. He is part of the ruling elite privileged classes of America for whom America's okay. And even though he says he understands, like when he talked at the beginning about how, when he was a kid and prices went up on food and he really understood the pain of that. Once again, I think he does understand immediate instances of pain. What he doesn't understand is the chronic economic despair. And that has been a problem. And, he was vice president to Obama. It's an elite class of Americans who think we'll fix it for you here, we'll fix it for you there, but we don't want to challenge the underlying forces that make the return of all this pain inevitable, because then we would be challenging all that corporate ownership of the basic tools of government. So if you want fundamental change, you're not going to get it. But if you want more immediate change and that peripheral change, I think he's trying his best. But he needs to go further. And if he doesn't go further, we also won't have the House or the Senate for the Democrats in 2022. Once again, going back to what Kyle said, that has to do with getting out your pen, Mr. President, and using those executive orders and doing what you can, including college loan debt. And I don't know how he expects to give a speech like tonight, not mention racial injustice, and even go on and on about more funding for the police. Nothing about even reforming the police, and expect Black America to think you're there for them. You think just one, as much as we're excited about Ketanji Jackson, I don't think anybody thinks that that's really going to answer to all the underlying racial injustices in this country that at this point are baked into the cake.
Marianne, something I'm curious about as a former presidential candidate, we were discussing this idea that Biden wasn't telling an interconnected story about America in the context of Ukraine, COVID, and just the broader economic issues you're describing. What story, especially tonight, would you tell?
Well, if you're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, this is the story as I see it. The big story in all this, in addition to all the things which I did feel he articulated very well, we have been told for many, many years that we didn't have to worry about a nuclear war because of the principle of mutually assured destruction. Well, guess what, everybody? That only works if you're talking with what they now call rational actors. You get a nuclear bomb in the hands of somebody that you don't think is that mentally stable, and the entire principle goes down the drain. On the other side of this, and I agree with the president, we will get to the other side of this. And I see Ukraine as he did. I hold Ukraine in my prayers as he did. I'm inspired by Ukraine as he did. But we all know that an entire post-World War II era, it's over. This whole thing is going to have to be reimagined, and we are going to have to what's going to happen, it's all going to be about nuclear bombs now. Some people are actually going to use this experience to say more countries should have nuclear bombs. What we have to stand for is total nuclear non-proliferation. When I was a young person, we used to go to protest, ban the bomb. We gave up on the whole thing. Well, this was a big wake-up call. We have to reimagine what we want, both for our democracy and on the other side of this war. We're living at a time of two simultaneous phenomena. Fall of Rome, and this country some things are falling apart on much deeper levels than this president even recognizes. But we're also living at a time when a new world is struggling to be born. So my answer to your question is that he is not compelling the American imagination to imagine what could be on the other side of this era. For that, we can't look to Joe Biden. But for a State of the Union speech, like I said, I got more from him than I expected.
That's interesting.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, this is a random point here, but I had to throw it out because I just saw it on Twitter. What's trending right now is the word Iranian, and that's because Joe Biden accidentally said, instead of saying the Ukrainian people, he said the Iranian people.
No, I didn't.
But you know what I was thinking when he said that, Kyle? I thought he said the Uranian people.
He might have.
Ukrainian,
I guess that's
Ukrainian.
better. Yeah.
But once again, maybe because I'm older, give him a break.
Yeah.
I hear
Give him
you,
a break
but
on that stuff, guys.
you know what I'm reminded
I
of,
don't
though?
think we can judge the president on a curve, though, personally.
But here's the thing. You know what I'm reminded of, Marianne? I'm reminded of that very famous Howard Dean moment in 2004.
Sure, the scream.
When he ran for president and he was leading, and then he was at a rally and awkwardly was like, "Meow!" And the media just went to town on him for like weeks, and then he just plummeted and he was out of it. And I feel like the optics conversation, even though ultimately it is substanceless to some degree, on the other hand, it's like, well, what's the thing that's trending on Twitter right now? So I feel like those optics, even though it's a sad thing to say, it sort of, in many ways, is going to define the speech.
Well, you might be right. And I remember being in a hotel room watching television when Howard Dean did that. And I knew, boy, it's over for him. I do remember that moment. But I would remind you that a lot of older Americans vote. And a lot of older Americans find themselves not able to come out with words quite the way they used to.
That's a good point.
I mean, you know, and a lot of those older Americans aren't necessarily on Twitter, and it's, you know, and also the disabilities issue. You know, I thought we were supposed to be so sensitive these days. His
Yeah,
man stuttered.
I have to say, though, Marianne, I think that was kind of invented. I mean, he definitely had a stutter and dealt with that, but then he was fine during the Obama years. It's only as he's gotten beyond the Obama years and gone.
I hear that.
And remember also, because this is why I have to push back on this, during the Democratic primary, this was fair game to discuss.
Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC.
Andrea Mitchell, remember Julian Castro went after him, Morning Joe was talking. And then suddenly once he was the nominee, it was like, oh, we can't say anything about this anymore. And it's really just a stutter, so don't worry about it. Listen, it sucks, but it does matter that you have a president who is vigorous, who is in good health, who is up to the moment. And we don't get to interact with him on a daily basis in the White House to know what that looks like. We only get these little bits. And let me also say, he doesn't make himself terribly available to the press in order to have more of a body of, work to judge from here. So I do think that optics matter. Is it the most important thing? Of course not. The substance here, especially when we're facing a nuclear war, is what is most critical. And I hope that's what people take away from it.
If I may, I think you're really right that it was a very legitimate conversation when he was running. It's just that tonight we were talking about his performance, and I don't know, I thought his energy was quite strong.
So, Marianne, one more thing I wanted to ask you. I'm just seeing this now. Representative Lauren Boebert, apparently, I didn't catch this at the time. You guys could tell me if you did. But when Biden was talking about Afghanistan, he mentioned 13 American flag-draped coffins coming back. And Lauren Boebert apparently screamed out, "You put them in, 13 of them," when he mentioned the flag-draped coffins coming back from Afghanistan. So she sort of heckled him about the deaths of American soldiers.
Yeah.
That's pretty low.
Right. Well, everybody talked about the drone strikes and the horrors that happened with that exit. And believe me, I think the exit was done horribly. But I don't know what people thought we were doing there for the last 20 years. People were dying, and not just Americans, Afghans as well. So I don't think we could expect any more from Lauren Boebert. I think she was probably well behaved given what she's normally like.
Well, she'll definitely raise a lot of money off of it, so I guess everybody wins on this front.
Mission accomplished, Lauren.
Really appreciate you joining us, Marianne. Thank you so much for your analysis on this.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Of course. I think we also have Zed Jelani standing by, so go ahead and call me out on that control room if I'm incorrect. But we want to talk with him a little bit about COVID, and that's something that, like I said at the top in our analysis, we were like, we haven't really talked about COVID, and yet it did. 2 weeks ago was the most important issue in the entire country. So, Zed, I think we have a clip of this control room. I'm not sure exactly which one I'm calling for. I think it's the one ending school shutdowns, and I believe it is the last shot that I had listed for all of you. Zed, it's great to see you, by the way. Let's have a clip of this, and then we're going to get your reaction.
We can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely.
That's a significant pivot there that we have, Zed, on the politics. Nobody in the chamber, where at least not that I could see, wearing masks. I mean, things have changed completely overnight. You've been tracking a lot of this with the schools and whatnot. What do you make of this portion of the speech?
Yeah, I think the Democrats have collectively decided, at least at the national level, that they're going to strike a more moderate tone on COVID-19. You'll see this in his text. He says that COVID-19 need no longer control our lives, right? And then he quickly also covers the other flank by saying, I know some are talking about living with COVID-19. I say that we'll never just accept living with COVID-19. So he's trying to kind of cover both sides of it, but he's shifting more towards what's been the Republican position, right? If you're living in most of Florida, you're saying, what are you talking about? We've been doing that for 6 months. We've been doing it since last summer. But if you're living in, let's say, New York or Connecticut, New Jersey, Virginia now is having its changes. These are new things to you, right? To be able to send your children to school without wearing masks, to be able to, in some parts of the country, go to a restaurant or go to a bar without a vaccine passport. A lot of these restrictions are sort of collectively being taken down now, I think, over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And I think that is a political pivot on the Democrat side, right? The virus didn't go anywhere. It hasn't necessarily changed in lethality or in form. But I think the Democrats have acknowledged that a lot of the country does want to get to somewhat more of a normal position on this. I think that's a lot of why Joe Biden was elected in the first place, right? The last guy was introducing a lot of chaos into their lives in many different parts of society. And I think that part of returning to that normalcy is getting people to a position in a place where they don't have to feel deathly afraid of a virus all the time. They should take some precautions. But their children you don't have to send two-year-old kids into classrooms wearing masks where they don't even know what the faces of their teacher looks like or the other kids. And I think the Democrats were kind of drag kicking and screaming to that position. A month ago in Virginia, they were all accusing Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor, of all sorts of nasty things about how he doesn't care about the welfare of children or vulnerable people. But I live in Northern Virginia, and I can tell you during this entire time, I was seeing packed restaurants and bars with maskless people. So I think part of this was just political. I think there had been a political culture created around a lot of these restrictions. And now the Democrats are moving into a position where I think they're going to disarm their side, right? They're going to say, hey, look, we can come to a reasonable compromise on this. And it's probably a wise move of their part. Maybe they should have done it 6 months ago. Probably would have been politically beneficial for them to do it. And I don't think it would have made much of a public health difference either, given the nature of the virus.
So Zed, let me ask you this, because to what do you attribute that change? Because I just looked up the numbers now. There's a Washington Post poll that came out. This is February 20th to 24th. Americans prioritize controlling the spread of the virus more than ending restrictions. 58% of U.S. adults would prefer controlling the virus to having no restrictions. And then another poll, this was in early February, 56% of Americans want indoor mask mandates to continue. So, to what do we attribute this change in tone among the Democrats? Because, the number of daily COVID deaths, if you take a look at it, at the moment it is 1,859. That was, the last day we have. So we still have a high death rate. We have the American people still slightly leaning more in favor of some degree of restrictions. To what do you attribute the change among the Democrats? Because I agree with you that change is there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think if you look at a lot of them, we're polling on a more fine-grained platform, you'll still find a lot of support for some restrictions, not necessarily the level of restrictions we had, I'd say, in 2020, but there is a lot of support, I think, for continued masking in some areas. I don't think the vaccine mandates have as much support as they have, particularly after the Supreme Court decision. But I think part of what attributes the change is actually election results, right? So the Virginia gubernatorial election, you saw a state where there was, it went 10 points for Joe Biden, and then the Republican picks it off by a couple points. I think that scares a lot of the Democrats because they understand that even if the polling is still 50-50 or even a little bit more towards the restrictions, that the side that's against the restrictions is very highly motivated right now. And I imagine that the side against the restrictions is picking off all these wins with Democratic elected officials. That's going to change the Democratic base's point of view on a lot of these restrictions as well. And so I think they're kind of seeing the writing on the wall in terms of how that's going for a lot of the country. It was very notable to me that even after this high-pitched battle in Virginia over school mask mandates, the day after Virginia dropped its school mask mandates, that's when New York removed their statewide, school-wide state mask mandate for the children in schools. So I imagine that this issue is going to become depolarized very quickly now. And I'm sure we'll continue to see waves of COVID. The virus is not going anywhere. And as you mentioned, quite a few people are still passing away from the virus, although those are still mostly elderly people who chose not to get vaccinated. And many of them have underlying health conditions. And so I think, something notable to point out in the substance of the policy of this issue is that Mexico today is doing a better job as a percentage of people who they're boosting than the United States is, right? Wow. What does that tell you? Well, we're fighting over masking 2-year-olds, and almost no 2-year-olds in the United States have even gotten a bad cold from COVID, let alone perished. We're doing a terrible job, I think, in terms of, again, getting those vulnerable elderly people with underlying health conditions vaccinated. And you only really do that with social trust, right? We tried mandates, Supreme Court didn't allow it. We tried fighting all sorts of culture wars over COVID. End of the day, we have to build trust about this. It's a virus. It doesn't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Vaccines aren't perfect, but they do offer quite a bit of protection to folks. And I think rebuilding that trust and moving forward together is probably better than fighting some of the more pointless fights about some of the more pointless restrictions. And I think the Democrats are starting to get that now.
Speaking of pointless fights, let's talk about the culture war for a second. A good way of summing up what seems to have happened tonight with your comments on COVID, Biden's comments on COVID, and then the reference to not defunding the police, it seems like Biden is trying to do a culture war reset, just completely putting aside a lot of the nice, a lot of the discourse there for the past 2 years, oftentimes that Biden wasn't particularly engaged with. He wasn't the defund the police candidate. Can you just comment on this pivot and whether or not this is a pivot that will address broader concerns people could have about the Democratic Party, moderate candidates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, I think it's a challenge because the Democratic Party in the United States, we have basically two major party coalitions. We're not a proportional representation country. I think you can make a good case that we should be, but we're not. So the Democratic Party has a wide variety of views, right? I don't think Biden's position personally has ever been towards defunding the police, for instance. But everywhere in America that did do something of that extent, it is a place that's controlled by the Democratic Party, right? Like Austin, I made a short documentary for Fox News about their defund the police effort and the referendum they had afterwards. Some other major cities have done that. And I think that creates a tension between Biden's positions and what's actually happening in his party. And something you'll note is that even when Biden does this, he never actually says that, like, okay, the mayor of Portland needs to, like, actually support police and, like, get people arrested who are, like, starting a riot every single night for several months, right? Or the city of Austin was wrong to cut a third of their police budget, right? He never gets into the more internecine fights with his party. He kind of downplay some of their slogans. So I think it's not entirely unfair when the Republicans say, hey, you guys keep doing it. You're not actually like getting into a lot of these situations and fixing the problem. At the same time, it is somewhat unfair when Republicans would portray Biden himself as holding some of these positions that he doesn't actually hold. But because of the coalitional nature of our politics, it's a push and pull, right? I don't think Biden wants to directly face off with some of the Democrats in his party who do want some of these ideas and have had some success implementing them in some places, given that police is largely a local function. Policing isn't really controlled by the federal government to begin with, so it's not really a presidential issue. But to the extent Americans are concerned about it, it is something they should talk to their local officials about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the national, defunding the police polls at 18%. And on the national level, I think there's only one Democratic politician who actually ran on it, Cori Bush, and she won. So it's not.
She represents Ferguson, doesn't she?
And she does, exactly.
Yeah, that's right, Missouri.
Where they had issues, to say the least. So yeah, I get it, but I feel like Joe Biden is the reason why he puts a line like that in there. He doesn't support defund the police, of course, but the reason he puts a line like that in there is because his staffers assure him, hey man, the left is the reason why you guys are losing. And the reason why Democrats, whenever you do lose, just blame the left. And so he puts that in there to be like, I'm going to tamp down on the crazies in my own party. I think that's why he added the line.
Yeah, well, and that kind of dovetails with what I wanted to ask you about, Zed, and the point that I wanted to make. Because, listen, I mean, the battles over defund the police, I'm not going to say that they haven't mattered electorally, but I think the much bigger problem for Democrats is that you have 70% of the country that's saying we're on the wrong track, that says the economy is going in the wrong direction. And so, I think we all sort of agree that Democrats are looking like they're in very difficult shape for the midterms. But what do you think Biden could have done in this speech to help to reset how Americans are, their expectations for the economy? I don't think you can reset how they feel about what's happening in their lives, but their expectations for what he might do and why it might be worth them reelecting Democrats. And do you think that he accomplished any of that tonight?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because it's a really, it's a tall order for a single speech, right? Because I think a lot of macroeconomic factors, particularly with inflation and what's happening with the supply chain crisis, are what's leading to most of, I think, Biden's woes and worries in terms of him being viewed as a competent leader or a leader who can actually address everyday problems. So it's really difficult to do in a speech. I think that he did his best in many ways in that he was highlighting domestic policy achievements, domestic policy proposals that are actually achievable, even though, Build Back Better obviously had all sorts of problems and is sort of stalled out. But I think that the main thing I would have done maybe a little bit differently than him is, I think at one point he said something like, let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other who we are, fellow Americans, and he, pivots to COVID-19. I think taking a little bit of responsibility on some of these issues for his party would have gone a long way in terms of rebuilding credibility with people like independents. Because let's be honest, the Democrats have basically said that anyone in America who believed in doing the things on COVID that they're doing now wants to kill your grandmother, right? They demonize them to a very extreme extent. And I think Biden, unfortunately, was part of that when he says things like, Georgia's enacting Jim Crow 2.0 and so on and so forth. If he really wants to shut down the culture war, which I would agree is the most divisive thing in the country, and I think it really drags Democrats down, it does actually matter if you take a little bit of responsibility and say, hey, my party did go a little too far on some of these things. And also, I think he should have taken some responsibility on just being very reactive to a lot of crises, right? If you all remember, when inflation really started hitting Americans, they kept saying that it was transitory, that it would go away quickly, that it wasn't a structural problem. And they did the same thing with the crisis at the border, with Afghanistan. I think they were doing a lot of PR and spinning rather than addressing it. Honestly, Ukraine was probably the first time where they took a crisis head on. And they actually predicted what was happening before it would happen, and were very transparent about it. I think that's a good model for them going forward, because I think it's one thing to have some nice lines in a speech, but at the end of the day, you have to take accountability and responsibility for some of the missteps you've made. And I didn't really see that as much from Joe Biden. Americans have been watching this story the entire time. They know that the administration was not on the ball when it came to a lot of these problems, and there's been a lot of, I think, particularly difficulties getting things through Congress, and not entirely Joe Biden's fault, but they exist. And I think putting a happy face on it only goes so far, right? Sometimes you do have to actually level with people, and maybe they didn't do that as much. So
yeah,
I think that's a good point.
They all consider that to be a risk, right? To be honest about, hey, we fell short on this or that thing. Certainly Trump was not out there admitting any mistakes. They want to project, they want to talk about here's what the wins were, the infrastructure deal, we're, vaccinating people and the rescue plan and all of that. But it actually, it connects with something we were saying earlier about the American people do want someone who's going to sort of step back from the theatrics and say the thing that we all know about, like, instead of this laundry list, I'm going to actually level with you. I do think that would land with people. Yeah. Zed, it's always great to have your thoughts. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Zed. Appreciate it, man. Great to see you.
And, one thing on the culture war point that is sort of one of my grand theories of politics, such as they are, is that there's no escaping the culture war unless you deliver for people materially. Because if people's conception of government just collapses down to, like, who's signaling the right way for my team, then all you're going to get is culture war.
Yeah.
So, he could have his Sister Soldier moment and say, I hate defund the police all day long, but culture war is still going to really dominate our politics as long as he is unable to enact and stick to an agenda that actually delivers materially for people in a way that they can sense.
And I don't think that's on Biden at all. I mean, he is the least woke person on the planet. Like, if he comments on the culture war, even to just denounce the culture war, so have like a meta conversation on the culture war, that is distracting from more lines on a $15 minimum wage or unions or foreign policy.
He's always like 10 seconds away from an ethnic slur.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't understand. Like, I don't get that criticism of him.
I have one bit of pushback on that, though, which is that 9 times out of 10 I'd agree with what you're saying. So if it's the Bush era, and I would agree with that. But right now, there are some really interesting debates. Like, once again, you guys did a bunch of stuff on Joe Rogan and censorship. There are some really non-material culture war issues that are up for debate right now.
That's a free
and Democrats have to think. But that's
culture war.
I don't consider that culture war. I consider it like, that's literally a constitutional issue in many respects.
We would hope so, Kyle. But I don't think the coalition
we could have a very long conversation about what culture war actually is.
Yeah.
I tend to think of culture war as being these sort of signaling issues that are more about just like, signaling to your team that I'm with you on this or that thing, that don't actually have a lot of impact on the direction of the country or people's lives. I would agree with Kyle that, free speech issues are profoundly significant beyond just like a cultural signaling issue, even though a lot of the people who engage in those debates are doing so in a way that's just about the signaling and not about substance.
Yeah, and ultimately, that's always the biggest problem whenever it comes to this. Okay, it's nearing everybody's bedtime here. Speaking,
it's past
some people's 3 hours past my bedtime. The Whoop is not going to be happy with me. I want to say a special thank you both to Kyle and Marshall. And we were supposed to do this at the top, but Kyle is going to be posting clips on the Breaking Points channel. Thank you very much to everybody for supporting our work here. Marshall, I'll let him finish his drink. He's going to be doing some great news interviews for us, which are also going to be appearing on the Breaking Points channel. I teased those little partnerships, so we've got 6 active partnerships now on the Breaking Points channel. Thank you to everybody for the super chats, for all of our premium members who help support this. This stuff costs a lot of money in order to put this stuff. We've got a full staff out there in the control room and more.
Shout out to those guys.
Possible. Yeah, shout out to all of them. Very quick work in making all this happen, putting up with some of our shenanigans. We cannot do it without any of you. You're going to have more stuff like this. Thank you all so much for supporting our mission here. We're just getting started. This is just a little bit of a preview about what's to come. And so thank you all to the, I think, 30,000 or so at one point who are watching this stream, the 200,000 or so which have checked in so far on this. It means the world in order to build this, and you guys are an active part of that mission. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate it.
Love you guys.
Later.
Thanks, y'all.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night, everybody.
Night.